Welcome to Dabo Recap. Enjoy your viewing. Subscribe. It was an ordinary clear day. The foliage on the trees was green and the sun had just risen. Someone was planing the wood with a knife. It was a slow and painstaking process. The first object that the guy had in his hand at birth was a knife. The young man carved something on a huge piece of wood and said that he was still a youth when his father gave it to him. Now the boy is 10 years old. His father, a sculptor, taught the young man how to use a knife, taught him how to be a man. Continuing to scrape the face on the huge statue, the boy said that he was using his brilliant mind and talent as an artist. Today he finished making what he had been doing for 10 years, a sculpture of his father, a real masterpiece. The guy recalled how his father, lying dying, told the boy to be careful from now on. The man reached out to his son and said that in this world Ryu Yon is his only son. The father patted his son on the head and asked him to be careful. He said that there are a lot of bad people in this world, and he doesn't want his son to get hurt. The father told the boy not to trust anyone except the master from the Kang family. The boy nodded his head. The guy thought about the fact that there was a deadly epidemic in the village that affected everyone who lived in the village. The master of the Kang family passed away 3 days ago. The boy and father were the only survivors. The guy didn't want to upset his father with such sad news, and therefore he simply nodded silently, agreeing with his father's words. Father said he was very proud that Ryu Yong is his son, the smartest and most hardworking boy. The guy held his father's hand and sat next to his bed, remembering the words of his father when he asked his son to be happy and kind to others, to be strong. He began to cry directly on his father's face on the statue, wiping tears from the statue of his father. The boy said that his father had the most beautiful smile. The boy raised the statue of his father and said that he should be happy, and then his father would also be happy in heaven. The guy stood over the statue and wiped away his tears with his hand. He was serious about becoming one of the people. Looking at the statue, Ryu Yong sighed and smiled as if the statue was alive and his father was standing there, and not a piece of wood. Looking at the statue of his father, the guy suddenly felt an unbearable emptiness. He did not understand what was wrong. Lost in thought, the guy put his palm to his beard and began to talk about where to put the statue of his father. The guy thought that if he puts his father like this, will he feel lonely? However, the guy added that fortunately his father would be joined by his mother's grave. The guy understood that he had artistic talent, but he was not special. His hands were fast. At sunset, the two statues of their parents were already standing next to each other. The boy said that it wouldn't be long before a new masterpiece was created. The boy said that his mother left them when he was 5 years old and he doesn't remember much about her, but he remembers that she was very beautiful. The guy stretched himself and said with relief that he had finally finished both sculptures. Someone started talking behind the young man. The guy turned back and shuddered. He was a tall old man with a long white beard who asked if the boy himself had made these sculptures. This is the story of how Ryu Yong met his cursed master. The boy thought that his father told him not to trust a stranger, and therefore he does not know how to talk to a suspicious old man. The old man pointed her finger at our hero and asked if these graves were his work. The young man understood that as a child, he must respect his elders, and if the old man behaved normally, he would treat him with respect. The boy stood proudly in front of the old man, bent his arms and said that he made these sculptures. The old man drew attention to the statues of the boy's father and mother, and he pointed his finger at them and asked if they were his sculptures. The boy was amazed that the old man passing by was surprised by his masterpieces. Proudly placing his hands at his side, the young man laughed and said that this was also his work. The old man became thoughtful even more. He grabbed his beard and was thinking about something in his head. The boy thought that judging by the old man's age, he would most likely ask him to make a sculpture for his grave. The old man looked at the guy and invited him to go somewhere with him. The boy didn't really understand. The surprised guy wondered what the old man meant by going with him. An old man named Sabu began scratching his beard and trying to interest the boy, saying that if he came with him. Smiling, the master said that he would teach the guy the best martial arts technique in the world. The surprised guy asked why he should believe the nonsense that the old man was telling him. The old man laughed and asked the boy to pay attention to him and look carefully. Sabu raised his hand and extended it forward, looking forward in a relaxed manner. The old man stood in front of a huge number of trees. The wind was blowing and the leaves were rustling. The old man concentrated his power in the palm opposite him and a white ray appeared from the sky and hit the ground. Instantly after that, all the trees were cut down or felled. The entire area of the forest was destroyed. Our hero could not believe that this strange old man knew such a destructive technique. Ryu wanted Young learns from him. The guy looked at the old man in surprise and thought that in any case, there was no place for him to go. Then the guy extended his hand to the old man, agreed to go with him, and decided for himself that he could make the most of this life. The guy walked hand in hand with the old man and thought that he wanted to do this stupid thing, so he got a chance. The guy was lost in thought. In his thoughts, he fell deep into the water as an adult young man. Thus began his bloody fate. The guy swung right in the water and hit forward. Right in the water, the young man used some kind of shot technique and threw something in front of him. It was as if there was a huge energy explosion in the water from the guy's techniques, but it was all just a performance. When the guy first saw the old man, it seemed that he really wanted to become his master. But in reality, he just wanted to trample the young man's pride, his heart, and even his future. Meanwhile, somewhere among the mountains, it was evening. The sun was already setting and night was slowly coming. The guy understood everything the day they arrived at the master's shack. Our heroes stood in front of a small house with a thatched roof. The front door was ajar, and when the wind blew, it opened with a nasty creak. The entire territory of the house looked as if abandoned. Dust, everything was lying around in an unclear place. Our hero was very surprised and asked if this was a joke. The guy, with his mouth open, watched the sad picture from the old man's home. The young man asked why such a strong martial practitioner lived in a place like this. Okay, the guy scored. He didn't know how strong the old man was, but he knocked down the trees very steeply. The guy turned his head and said that he understood everything. Don't those weird masters from the stories live in hidden places to train their students? The little boy said that the most important thing is that he can learn something from the old man. He is a kind-hearted child, and therefore should not be so smart. The boy asked what he would learn today. The old man scratched his beard and asked if the guy was ready. The next day, the guy stood with a serious look and looked at the master. Sabu said that he would show it only once and the young man should watch carefully. The bowl of rice was filled with water. The master said that the grains of rice are hard, but at the same time fragile, so they can be easily destroyed, very easily. The student watched the teacher, and meanwhile the old man said that this should be done slowly and effortlessly, but he also needs to use the strength of his fingers for this task. The trainer continued to wash the rice. Showing an example to the student, the master said that rice should be washed at least 3 times. Sabu further said that the tightness of the pot also affects the final taste of the rice, and therefore the young man should not forget to cover it with a lid. Drawing the guy's attention, the old man told him to remember that if he cooks in the mountains, he must take a stone from the top and put it on the lid in order to experience the real beauty of rice. The next day, the old man again taught cooking to his young student. He said that each type of food has its own characteristics, so the young man should use different techniques for each food. Leading by example, the old man was cooking and saying that flying cooking techniques can be used for vegetables, meat, tofu, and so on. After putting the ingredients in hot oil, they will cook quickly. The master added that cooking ends only when all the aromas and tastes become one, and also continued to chop the vegetables and throw everything into the soup. Smiling, the mentor said that the most important thing in cooking is feelings. If you cook sincerely, then the whole universe will bow to your strength. Ryu Young asked the master if he was a chef, and also asked if he was learning to cook to become the best chef in the world. Sabu sighed heavily and said that the guy doesn't see the whole picture, doesn't see what Sabu is trying to teach him. The mentor said that he wanted to teach the student a hail of lightning, a flying thundersword, a technique that requires incredibly gentle but skillful hands, as well as an outstanding understanding of technology. Sabu said that cooking trains a guy's dexterity and harmonizes his technique with the art of cooking. The guy thought about it and said that everything he was told sounds like a lie, but the name of the technique is interesting. Sabu handed his kitchen axe to the student and told him to try it. The boy reluctantly asked if he should. Remembering all this, our hero understood that this was his last chance to refuse the old man and escape. The old man taught him how to use a frying pan and taught him how to cook. When something didn't work out for the guy, the old man would hit him lightly on the top of the head with his pipe. The guy learned how to use a fire, how to light it correctly, and everything like that. A month later, the guy was already bringing food to the master's table, and he said that today, the table looked acceptable. The student shouted at the mentor and asked him not to forget about food, and also asked why in this house only he cooks food. Sabu felt guilty for forcing him to cook when he was just sitting and relaxing. The man began to look displeasedly at the student, and Ryu himself Young added that if the teacher tried to do something, he could also feel younger. On this day, the master finally showed his real face. He beat his student, and Ryu himself Young added that a good spanking makes you think about a lot of things. Terrible screams were heard from the house. The master beat the student with incredible force because he had enraged him. The guy thought about it and said that knowing this fact greatly affected my future. Sabu said that he was already tired of all these exercises, and from now on the boy would cut wood for cooking himself. The beaten guy stood and silently listened to the old man. He did not understand how this damn old grandfather could do this to his tender body. Not noticing the axe, the young man was very surprised, saying that the old man didn't even have an axe. The boy asked about the axe, to which the master replied that he did not need the axe and had not yet come to his senses. Taking a fighting stance, the boy asked if he would have to use his fists to slash, just as the master used them to beat the boy's young body. The master put his hand in his pocket and said that if the guy doesn't want to get it again, Then he should close himself and watch carefully. The master pulled the handle of some small object in his pocket. Throwing it into the sky, the object made several full rotations several times and fell into his hands. It was a small knife that the master held in his hand. Seeing the knife, our hero was very surprised and opened his mouth in surprise. Twisting the knife, the old man asked the student if he was surprised and simply laughed. The boy silently looked and thought that no matter how you looked at it, it was an ordinary knife. The young man covered his mouth and said that even though it was an ordinary knife, the old man was still trying to be cool with it. They sat down to the stump, and the master himself told the student to carefully observe his brush. The old man raised his hand over the stump and lightly swung his small knife. With a slight wave, the master cut the stump in half. It looked like a knife had been passed through butter. The boy was as surprised as possible and opened his mouth because he was shocked. In the future, he would not see how tree stumps were cut in half with a knife. The old man handed the knife into the hands of the student and told him to now try to repeat his movements. The boy began to refuse. Then Sabu inspired him that it was easy and he would succeed, and then explained that the trick was to bend your wrist at the right moment. The guy decided that he should at least try to repeat the trick after the master, and so he got ready. Trying to repeat the trick after the master, the young man did everything he could, but it was as if the log had not even been cut a quarter of the way through. The guy continued to repeat the same thing, and the master himself closely watched his student. However, getting angry, he realized that this is the reality and he cannot do it like a master. The old man thought about it and said that if the boy couldn't even do something so simple, then he couldn't be helped, and said to try using his elbow instead of his hand. The boy stood up and tried to repeat his mentor's trick using a different technique. There was a blow. The guy was able to cut the log by a small percentage, but this was already a huge success. Looking up at the sky, Sabu laughed, saying that he was surprised that the guy still couldn't do this even with his elbow, and then suggested using his shoulder as well as his hand. The boy hit the log again, but again he couldn't cut it much, and he spent a lot of energy. The guy couldn't cut the log, but simply threw it away. The old man was clearly not in a good mood. The old man said that the guy still lacked speed, and also explained that he should only use his brush, not his speed. The offended young man sat near the tree stump and said that it didn't work out for him not because he was incompetent. He also said that how can Sabu force his student to do the impossible? The angry guy stood and was silently angry with the old man. In his thoughts, he understood that he could not say anything. Otherwise, he would begin to teach him wisdom. Ryu Young said that he is only 10 years old, and although he is a genius, his body is young and weak. He said that he couldn't chop wood with this small knife, and he needed something big and strong. The old man thought about it, and said that the boy was reasoning correctly, and then decided to think about a large and strong instrument. The old man said that if all the boy needs is big and strong, then he knows what to take and went somewhere. The old man turned the house upside down in search of his tool, which he wanted to give to the guy. The frightening old man found a huge axe. He was holding it in his hands and looked like some kind of maniac. This huge axe was brought. The old man said that at first the guy would use it to chop wood. Our hero did not understand what the old man, who was already leaving his house, found there. Sabu was holding a huge axe in his hands. The boy noticed this and was surprised. The boy stared at the mentor and thought about why the mentor didn't give him an axe right away, but gave him a knife, which is much more difficult. Sabu asked why the guy was staring at him so much and making a malicious smile. The old man handed the axe to his student, and Ryu Yong put his hands out to take the axe. The old man released the axe over the hands of his student, and it fell into the hands of our young hero. When the axe touched the palms of our hero, something was wrong, the guy wondered, and then, after which the guy fell to his knees as if holding this very heavy axe. The guy let go of the axe and then it plunged into the ground with tremendous force, cutting the earth and stones beneath it. The guy fell exhausted and a large cloud of dust formed around him due to the fact that the axe fell. Ryu Yong grabbed his shoulder and screamed in pain as much as he could. He was in a lot of pain. The old man watched the guy, watched him writhe in pain and hold his shoulder. The guy shouted at his mentor, "What kind of axe is this if it is so heavy?" and that he almost dislocated his shoulder. The mentor said that he weighs only 70 gyuans. The guy sat down and began to calculate that 70 gyuans equaled 42 kilograms, and then he became noticeably stunned. Making his eyes look like those of a small kitten, the guy asked how the trainer could even expect a child to lift something so heavy with such a young and tender body. The old man yelled at the student and told him to lower the laziness bar, and also added that the guy could do anything if he stopped being lazy and put in even a little effort. The guy got angry that his method didn't work, and continued to listen to the old man who said that even Ryu Yun can lift that axe with a little persistence. Sabu noticed that the boy's clothes were dirty, and it seemed like it was time to teach him how to do laundry, and also added that he could finally get rid of this routine. The mentor ordered the young man to follow him. He turned in the other direction and walked, leading the young man behind him. It was a source of water with a beautiful view. The sun hit the water with its rays, and the water began to sparkle as if there were many precious stones there. The old man said that the guy can clean his things in this place, but at the same time, thanks to the environment, the young man can clean not only things, but also his thoughts along with his body. The guy said that he would agree to come here, even though this place was 30 minutes from home, and it was warm in it, just like in the summer, even though it was winter outside. The guy was surprised and shouted what a pile of dirty, disgusting clothes that was standing next to him was. The guy asked if he would wash it all alone, with his gentle hands. Taking one thing out of many, the guy covered his nose because the stench was incredible. The boy asked if these things had not been washed since last winter. The guy continued to ask similar questions about dirty things, and the old man frowned and asked the guy again. Making a frightening look, the old man asked if the boy had any problems. The boy trembled with fear. He knew what his mentor would do to him, and so he said that he was simply surprised by the pile of clothes. The guy said that since he was Sabu's student, he could do this for his master. The master snorted and took out the tool from his belt. It was a huge washing spatula. The old man held it out and said that the boy could use this washing spatula to make his washing easier. The mentor handed the spatulas to the guy and raised them above the palms of our hero. He told the boy to do everything quickly and throw the spatula. When the shoulder blade began to touch the guy's hands, he realized that this was a familiar feeling. What did the guy feel? The young man again could not hold the instrument and fell along with it to the ground. A lot of dust rose around him. The guy began to tremble and scream in pain. Clutching his hands, the guy again asked why the instrument was so heavy. Sabu looked at the student with a dissatisfied look and asked what a heavy instrument means. The shovel got stuck in the sand due to its weight. The master said that it weighs only 50 jians. It is lighter than an axe. The young man began to count how much 50 jian was and realized that 50 jian equaled about 30 kilograms. The guy didn't understand anything. He said that this spatula would tear his clothes. The mentor shouted that he had already told the student to stop being lazy, and added that the clothes would tear if washed in the usual way. Taking a stance, the teacher began to talk about how the guy must achieve a skill known as yu, so that even in his strength he can feel softness. With the help of yu, he can wash things correctly. The old man continued to say that this is a secret technique that has been passed down in our clan from generation to generation, and its name is the secret of washing. The shocked young man stood and did not understand anything. He did not even notice that Sabu was just crucifying himself in front of him. The old man waved the student aside and told him to just learn this technique, and he turned around. The surprised young man shouted after his mentor and said that he did not understand anything. The old man told Ryu Young learned the technique that Sabu had just explained to him, and told the boy to try to remember what his mentor said. The angry boy shouted after the old man to at least explain to him how to use this yu before he left. Having already gone far, the mentor shouted for the student to finish washing before sunset, and also chop wood and prepare food. The boy shouted that Sabu didn't teach him anything, and now he thinks that Ryu Yang will erase it all. What did our hero decide to do? Having looked closely, he realized that the old man had already gone quite far from him, and all that was nearby was the rustling of the wind and falling leaves. The wind blew and tore off still green leaves from each tree, and the boy stood between the trees and thought. The boy's groans from fatigue could be heard from the pond. He washed these things, and did not even fully understand how it was done. The guy imagined that if he didn't wash his things, the old man would kill him, and therefore he got scared and trembled. Meanwhile, it was already evening outside. The weather was beautiful outside, and birds were flying near the trees. Sabu was lying on a bench in his yard and drinking sake from a jug in his hand. The guy was dragging the tool along the ground, and the old man asked why he didn't handle the tool properly. The old man added that if the guy continues to pull it like that, he might damage the thing. Covered in sweat, the tired guy said that this particular shoulder blade would not be damaged by such treatment, carrying things and pulling a huge shovel behind him. The guy said that if anything could be damaged, it would only be his limbs. The guy dragged everything home and fell exhausted without even taking off the rope by which he was pulling the shovel. The old man approached the boy and told Ryu Young stopped crying as if he were a child who spilled milk. The old man took the spatula, waved it, said that it was not heavy, and made sure that it was intact. The exhausted guy was already lying exhausted on the ground, and Sabu added that he still had to go chop wood and cook food. The old man said that it was time to see what the guy had been doing all this time. He looked into the basin, and he was as shocked as possible. The smile disappeared on his face, and complete shock appeared. What did he see? The master's surprise was so strong that he dropped his precious spatula to the ground. Meanwhile, the young man tried to crawl home. Sabu addressed him as his young student. Master grabbed Ryu Yona, was dragged by the collar and dragged somewhere. The boy screamed with all his strength. The old man led the student to the things, and showing pieces of fabric, asked where the things were and what kind of rags they were instead of things. Holding the exhausted guy by the scruff of the neck, the old man forced him to answer the question. Sabu was very angry. The boy barely turned his head at him and didn't know what to answer. He really wanted to rest. The guy began to make excuses that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how often he brought this tender body to the extreme point. This tool was very difficult to use, and he could never get it right. He used the spatula as in normal washing and simply threw it on the clothes, which caused them to tear. The guy recalled this hell when nothing worked out for him, and he simply wasted time, energy, and received nothing. The boy said that the clothes became like this because his mentor didn't even teach him the Yui technique, let alone that damn stroke. Sabu got angry, took his fist, and was about to hit the young man. He asked before that whether Ryu thought it's all Sabu's fault. Ryu Yong completely forgot about the problems with the master's anger and realized that it was too dangerous to put pressure on him like that. The boy said that the master should despise sin, but not the sinner. Ryu Young, pointing to the shoulder blade, said that Sabu is also a person and suggested blaming this damn stroke for everything. The young man continued to blame the instrument for everything, and Sabu himself laughed and decided something for himself. He looked at the young man with a terrifying gaze and said that apparently he still had a lot to teach the boy. From such a glance from the master, Ryuyona began to sweat on his face. The boy was scared by these words. Meanwhile, the boy's screams of pain were heard from the house. The second lesson was in progress. Due to the master's rough upbringing, as a child, the boy could only blindly obey his words. The boy convinced himself that this was just part of the training. Meanwhile, in the evening, under a candle, the boy was sewing up torn clothes. This was training to increase the sensitivity of his hands. The boy listened to a lecture from the old man so that he would not forget to use kanakas, slip stitches, cross-stitch, seams, chain stitch, and all the other techniques that Sabu taught him. Sabu added that sewing up all the clothes would benefit the boy, and the sensitivity of his hands should increase. The boy held a piece of fabric, a needle, and swallowed saliva from excitement. He had no experience in sewing. The boy missed and pricked himself with a needle directly in his finger. For the first time, the pain was unbearable. Blood started flowing from his finger, and the boy himself began shouting all the bad words he knew. Early morning the next day. Outdoor workout for the lower body. The guy was running, and in a great hurry somewhere. He had to do everything as quickly as possible. The boy jumped from stone to stone, holding a bucket carrier on his back. He collected water. 1 bucket was on his head and 2 on his sides. A 10-year-old boy carried more water than a grown man in the village usually carries. Morning, training to hone skills, feelings, and speed number 1. The guy was preparing breakfast. Late morning, working out to strengthen his upper body. The young man dipped a rag into a bucket of water, and then he started cleaning everywhere. Washing floors, washing drawers, sweeping, and so on. Next was training to hone skills, senses, and speed number 2. The guy was preparing lunch. After lunch, special training for strength and skill number 1. The guy did the laundry. The guy used this heavy tool to wash clothes, but so far he wasn't very successful. The clothes still turned into some kind of torn rags that couldn't even be called clothes. In the afternoon, special training for strength and skill number 2, the guy chopped wood with a super heavy axe. He was eating as he lifted this huge axe over a log that needed to be cut. And after that, he released the axe over a piece of wood, and the axe quickly fell, cutting everything in its path. Then, before sunset, training for honing skills, feelings, and speed number 3, the young man was preparing dinner. Already exhausted, he fell to the ground. Evening, training to increase the sensitivity of the hands. The guy was sewing up clothes that he had torn. The boy accidentally pricked himself on a needle many times and his finger bled. Next day, early morning, Ryu Young was carrying water, training in the fresh air. Evening, embroidery, training to increase the sensitivity of the hands, and then everything again, training at noon, after lunch. A week of such training passed and the guy was already lying exhausted on the floor, sighing heavily, his whole body trembling in pain. An old man approached the boy and said that it was still not as easy as the young man wanted, was it? Sabu looked smart and proud and said that he would give the guy some advice to make his life easier. Sabu began to explain that the path of the lightning spirit is a spiritual technique that requires the user to be familiar with inner strength to use. Sabu continued by saying that there is another spirit technique called the way of the condemned spirit. First, the guy must understand that thunder and lightning do not just appear in the sky. The energy of yin and yang that comes from mountains, rivers, and oceans creates thunderclouds. A mixture of a little yin and a lot of yang can cause a blinding flash. This is what people call lightning. The path of the lightning spirit allows the user to summon the spirit of lightning through the power within. The human body was created with the ability to absorb the energy around us. This energy affects our body from head to toe, although we sometimes do not notice it. The breath should not stop in the nostrils, but should gather and disperse. This will teach Ryuyona control the flow of energy. The old man added that the guy must subjugate his energy. Lighting his pipe, the old man said that, like all people, they instinctively know how to breathe correctly. Sabu continued that most people go through life without learning how to breathe properly. The old man began to tell a story about how once upon a time there lived a madman who sprayed gas on random passers-by. By instinct, most of them first covered their noses. But everyone who did this died. The point is that if you don't know how to control your true breath, your body will inhale poison. Loudly and admiringly, the old man said that if the guy can develop the mastery of inner strength and learn the path of the lightning spirit, then he will have nothing to fear. He will be able to absorb the essence of lightning. The guy meditated and silently listened to his mentor. When Sabu finished, he asked if the young man understood everything. The boy breathed deeply and continued to meditate and not answer his mentor. The guy said that he liked the story, but he didn't fully understand what the old man wanted from him. Maybe this time he should make more efforts. The guy asked what he needed to do. The old man said that all he needed to do was collect energy, dissipate it, and subordinate it to his will, using only his inner will, strength, and reason. The old man also added that to do this, the young man must use basic breathing methods, practicing Qigong in order to open his meridians, and only after that, he will learn to control everything correctly. The meridian is only 12. Ryu Yang will have to memorize the huge number of arteries and veins that are in the human body. The guy was overloaded with new information, and therefore his head was ready to explode. But he continued to listen. Sabu said that if a guy asks him to repeat, he will think that the guy is not trying hard enough and will punish him. The guy said it wasn't fair and asked for some notes. Sabu hit the student on the head with a pipe and told him not to raise his voice to the master anymore. And if he thinks all this is dishonest, then he can write everything down to pass it on to his student. In any case, once a guy develops the path of the condemned spirit, then remembering all this won't be a big deal. The offended guy did not understand and asked whether everything was really that simple, and whether this technique would make him a super-duper genius. Sabu said that Ryu Yang doesn't even know what kind of technique this is. The basis of any control is to systematically control the physical and spiritual self. The path of the condemned spirit twists the head like a thread, making the maximum potential. This spiritual thread is almost indestructible. It is even like a lake in terms of purity, calmness, and transparency. Having achieved it, the body will achieve almost natural immutability. The student continued to make some strange statements, and Sabu hit him on the head, and then said that if he wants to become the best, then he needs to learn to focus. The guy asked how he could learn this technique, the old man said, through concentration training. Although Sabu added that there are people like him who do not agree with such ineffective training methods, the old man added that he will teach the guy through outdoor training, diet, and so on. Sabu smiled and said that the guy shouldn't worry. This technique was developed with the blood, sweat, and tears of the previous generations of the Lightning Clan. The guy got scared and said that he had a bad feeling about this. Our hero held his head and did not understand how he could master all this knowledge. Meanwhile, some kind of green meadow, good weather, clear sky. Body workout number 1, outdoor training. The guy was walking along some path and wondering when a person concentrates best. Seeing the mushrooms, the guy walked towards them and said that the best concentration is when you are distracted for a split second, and your head is about to fall off your shoulders. The guy started picking mushrooms one by one and throwing them into his mushroom basket. The basket hung on the young man's back, and there was already a lot of things collected there. Wiping the sweat, our hero remembered that the body-shape training method uses this principle and is intended for outdoor training. The guy was walking through the forest and looked very tired. Ryu Yang had been wandering through this forest for a long time and collecting various things. The guy remembered Sabu's words that every day, 1 hour a day, the young man should go to the mountains and collect leaves, mushrooms, fruits, and medicinal herbs there. The guy noticed every blade of grass and approached it to inspect it and then collect it. Thanks to this training, Ryu Yang will not only be able to develop sensitivity and knowledge about the mountains. Coming closer to the grass, the guy jumped away from the place where the grass grew and screamed. He was scared of something. There was a large red snake that approached our hero and hissed at him. The guy recalled Sabu's words that every time he met animals there, the young man gained experience that contributed to the development of reaction, concentration, and speed of the body. Running away from the snake, Ryu Yang said that the master is a killer. The place where the guy was called Honyop Bong, because herbalists who met wild animals in the forest painted the bushes, who looked with a furious gaze from the bushes. It was the paw of a huge bear that crushed that red snake. Thanks to the painting of the bushes, no one goes there lately, and therefore it has become very quiet and peaceful. The guy remembered the words of his mentor that it was better for him not to make noise in this forest and to be more careful. The guy saw a huge brown bear and almost screamed in fear but covered his mouth with his hands. The boy began to run away, when from behind the bear someone ordered him to stand up, and the bear stood on 2 paws. The bear looked at the running boy and did not move. It was as if he was bewitched. It was Sabu, who was holding his small knife in his right hand. The master threw his knife at the bear's head and it went right through, and the bear roared in pain. Soon the bear fell and just lay around in this green clearing where Ryu collected plants Yang. Sabu caught his knife back and put it in his sleeve, where it always is. The master sighed, looked intently at the carcass of a huge bear, and then approached it. Sabu grabbed the huge animal by its right paw and dragged it home through the depths of the forest. Meanwhile, during the day, a pleasant smell was coming from the house. Someone was preparing food. Body workout number 2, diet. The guy ran home and couldn't catch his breath properly. He said that he barely survived. Entering the yard, the guy went crazy because there was a bearskin on the huge table. Sabu wondered what was incomprehensible here. The old man scolded the boy, saying that because he was an hour late, Sabu himself was preparing lunch and said that there would be bear soup. The guy looked at the table with plates and said that it seems that this cannot be called just bear soup. Sabu, grabbing a piece of meat, said that if the soup is from a bear, it means it's a bear, and in general the guy shouldn't find fault. The guy pointed his finger at Saba and said that there was something unfair about the nagging. Ryu Young added that the master's and the guy's menus were very different. Sabu had meat, fish, soup, and a lot of other tasty things on his table, and the young man only had soup and some vegetable dishes, no meat or fish. Sabu said that while training, the body and mind should be light. This is obvious. The old man said that the diet is elementary. Sabu, pointing to the tasty and fatty food, said that he would eat such unhealthy food himself for the sake of the student. Pointing to the other half of the table, the old man said that let the student eat tasty and healthy grass. Over time, the guy will realize the old man's care for him. The young man broke his chopsticks and was very angry at Sabu's words. Ryu Yong turned over the table on which all the food was and yelled at the master to stop lying to him, and he too could eat meat and fish. Ryu Yong was very angry and said that at this rate his life would end in 10 years. There were only bones and empty plates on the table. Sabu asked why the guy still hadn't eaten anything. The boy was surprised that Sabu had already devoured everything so quickly. The boy looked at the teacher and did not understand how this happened. The guy thought that meat was not air, so that it could disappear like that in one bite. Sabu, wiping his mouth, said that the boy had such an expression on his face that he decided to quickly eat everything. Otherwise, he would start to find fault again over little things. Sabu said that they needed to train, so he asked the guy to eat quickly, and the old man also added that whoever is last washes the dishes. Ryu Young got angry and said that the damn teacher would have hired him to wash the dishes anyway. After eating, body training number 3, practical learning, Sabu took our hero somewhere and asked him to say hello. Sabu said that this wood-carved child taught many generations of students, and young Ryu may call him a wooden martyr. The student was very surprised and asked why the martyr and whether it was a joke or not. Sabu hugged the mannequin and asked what his student didn't like, to which the boy said that the mannequin looked like it ruined the whole mood. Paying attention to the lower part of the body, the guy said that not only was the appearance like that, but he didn't like it at all. Sabu said that this wooden statue is made in the shape of a person to study acupuncture. The whole body is made very naturally. Sabu asked if the boy really wanted to take off that rag. The boy refused and said that he didn't need to yet. Sabu took the needle and said that to learn acupuncture, you need to start with 12 meridians and 8 points. Today he wanted to try to teach the guy 12 meridians. Sabu told the student to memorize how he would pierce the statue, and then the student would have to repeat the same thing. The student was happy that finally Sabu would teach him something interesting, and this was already a real training. The boy asked the meridian for only 12 and said that it was too easy, and he was also a genius. The old man said that we should try. The old man warned that if the boy made a mistake, he would punish him. The guy thought that he had fallen into some kind of trap. The old man raised his hand, made a serious face, and prepared to show his young student the points. Sabu began to run around the mannequin and talk about the 12 meridians, which are located in the human body along channels. Meridians are associated with internal organs. The old man continued to talk about the meridians and show them on the mannequin, explaining in detail about each. Our hero could not process so much information, and it seemed that his head would explode from so many stories about meridians. Sabu said in short, the yin meridians on the hands circulate from the chest to the fingers. The yang meridians on the hands circulate from the fingers to the head, and so on, all in a circle. The surprised boy asked if he really had to remember this mountain of terms the first time without repetition. And the teacher also chattered like Tina Kandalaki. Sabu replied that the boy called himself a special prodigy, and before complaining, he should at least try first. The young man asked who he should beat, and the old man, pointing his finger at the dummy, told him to show on the doll what he had learned. The old man told the boy to show everything from the lung meridian to the bladder. The master handed him a needle, and said that for every mistake, there would be one blow. Approaching the mannequin, the boy got angry because he didn't remember anything and would get in trouble. The old man smiled maliciously. The guy concentrated on his knowledge, on the past, and said that he must repeat everything now. The guy began to take off and run towards the mannequin. He was confident in himself. Sabu's actions from the outside, it looked like he was answering everything exactly correctly. The old man watched the student and was a little shocked that in one short lecture, The guy remembered so much and could even repeat it. The boy finished and was shocked with himself. He had a slight shortness of breath and asked the mentor if he repeated everything correctly. The sage stood and silently looked at his student with a strange look. Scratching his beard, the old man thought. He was still silent and did not utter a single word. Sabu finally answered that apparently he is a good teacher. The boy, of course, still has to study and study, but there is still a little hope. The young man did not understand why the master spoke of him like that. The boy was confident in himself. Our hero added that he had just seen with his own eyes how the old man was very surprised and asked whether it was really so difficult to simply praise. Sabu, in his defense, said that he was surprised by the number of unnecessary movements the boy made, and the boy himself thought that he passed perfectly. Sabu asked the boy to show the lung meridian on himself. The boy was surprised and asked the question again, after which the young man began to show points on his body and ask if he showed correctly. This was wrong. The old man said that the guy would be punished, and although 12 meridians bear that name, in fact, there are many more of them. The pulmonary meridian alone consists of 11 channels. The old man tensed, made a serious face, and began to walk closer to the boy. The boy himself stood and did nothing. The old man began to rush around the young man and show each meridian on the guy's body. All this time, the guy did not understand what was happening. Sabu finished and asked the guy how it felt. The guy didn't understand anything. He didn't know what to answer and was confused. After a moment, the young man felt relief in his body, as if a weight had been knocked out of him. The joyful boy said that this was an excellent massage. Lately, his back and shoulder had been aching, and he had suffered from heartburn, but now there was relief. The old man said that judging by the student's expression, he liked it, and asked the guy to remember these points with his body. The angry guy shouted at the mentor, asking why it wasn't possible before and indignant that the old man started his first lesson 2 months after he arrived. The master made a scary face and asked if the young man really wanted him to show all the points of influence at once, and also warned him not to object later. The guy took back his words and said that he got excited and suggested continuing. The guy in his head didn't understand why he was saying this, but he had a bad feeling. Sabu called the student smart and said that when emitting blood circulation, one should not practice lethal and paralyzing points of influence, all because of the possible lethal outcome. The old man said that the boy was too talkative and offered to show all the points of influence on the tongue. The young man poked at different points on the doll and asked the teacher to stop making noise, and also suggested starting their lesson. The old man laughed and said that they agreed on a blow for every mistake of the student. Sabu began to count how many points he showed, and how many of them were correct the guy showed. It came out to 618 minus 86. The frightened guy ran behind the doll and shouted that he should receive as many as 532 blows. And the boy himself said that this could not happen, and there should be fewer of them. The old man rolled up his sleeves and smiled. He said that with each blow he would show which points the guy named incorrectly and let the body remember them. The fleeing youth shouted that after all these blows he would simply die, and therefore began to run away. The old man ran after the young man all day and all evening, and when he caught up, he beat the young man quite well. The next day, the boy trained at the same place with his mentor Sabu. The old man gave a lecture and showed the dots, and the guy memorized and repeated. The guy did well. He was confident and serious. He was imperfect, and therefore he beat the boy lightly for every mistake. They trained like this until the evening. The sun almost set behind the mountains and night almost fell. The young man sat and meditated, and Sabu sat opposite and gave some teachings to the guy. Then the guy didn't forget about training and meditation. He still sat on that stone and meditated. 4 months passed. The guy was sitting on a stone and meditating. The guy breathed in clean air, and in appearance he had matured quite well, although 4 months is not that long. Our hero was collecting some kind of white energy between his 2 palms. Ryu Yang absorbed this pure white energy that spread through his veins. The guy again began to collect some kind of energy in his hands, only he already held his palms above his legs. The guy was so deeply immersed in this matter that nothing around him could bring him down. Sabu came to him, who asked if the guy would finish soon. The old man continued to ask the student when he was going to cook, chop wood, wash and clean. The young man pointed his head at his mentor and asked if he had noticed. What was there? The boy walked up to the table and pointed with his palm at the set table with a bunch of food. Then he pointed to a chopped mountain of firewood, enough for more than a day. Continuing, Ryu Yang pointed to the clothes being dried with his finger, saying that there was drying there. Next, our hero showed a room that had been washed to a shine and said that he had already cleaned up. The guy said that if that's all, then he will go to finish learning Naren Simbab and Yonsa Simjol, because when studying them he does not physically strain, and therefore can take a break. The dissatisfied teacher said that the young man had only learned the basics, but was already behaving like a know-it-all, and also added that if someone had seen this from the outside, they would have considered the young man a servant, not a student. The guy turned around and asked with a dissatisfied face if he wasn't Sabu's servant. Sabu told the guy not to rush, and he was not ready for fighting techniques yet. The guy didn't believe it and muttered something negative under his breath. Sabu said that if a guy thinks he's ready, they can try something. The old man pointed his finger at some musical instrument and said that from that day on, the young man would learn to play it. It was a huge, long instrument with strings that was the size of a boy, if not larger. Sabu began a lecture about how wielding the smashing thunder sword was like playing an orchestra. Sabu continued by saying that playing the Gyagyam requires finger technique and extreme concentration, and especially this Nagyam. It is believed that not everyone can master it. The old man began to tell me that playing an instrument involves not only technique, but also something else, something special. This is something that will help the guy manage this equipment in the future. The young man, with a sparkle in his eyes, said that if the boy could learn to play this instrument, then half the battle was done, and he could quickly learn to control the blade. Ryu Young, with a look of surprise on his face, said that the old man used to not even let him wipe the dust off the instrument, but now he will finally learn to play it. Night. Some young man was playing some instrument on the mountain. Girls were spying on him, saying that he was very handsome. The girls called this handsome guy a prince, the youngest and most handsome master. Having gathered, our hero said that a warrior must wield not only a sword, but also a musical instrument. The old man held the boy close and said that he did not have in his plans the part of learning a musical instrument. The guy didn't understand what it meant to have no plans to study a musical instrument. Sabu sighed and said that Ryu Young is small, but already loves to show off. The master also added that this Nigam is a priceless treasure of his school, and therefore it is an honor for him to learn how to play it. The old man walked away from the instrument and said that first, you need to teach the guy to play the Gyagyam, and then further. At this time, the young man said that the instrument was very beautiful and tried to pull the string. The guy wanted to listen to how the instrument sounded, and therefore he almost touched the string. Sabu looked at the student and was very surprised. He was holding another instrument in his hand. At the moment when the guy's finger had already touched the string, Sabu shouted that he shouldn't do this, but it was too late. The young man pulled the string and cut his finger very badly. He screamed in pain. While bandaging the student's finger, Sabu scolded him for not listening to him, and also told him to thank God that he was not left without a finger. The old man wiped the blood from the instrument and said that this instrument was made of a special material, from a thread that controls thunder, which cuts everything that touches it. The guy misunderstood the mentor and did not think that the instrument was so dangerous. The guy asked how it was even possible to learn to play something like this. The old man held another instrument in his hand and called the student a wooden head. Having sat down and picked up the same instrument with special strings, Sabu said that he would personally play one melody for the guy. The man put his hands on the strings, sat down comfortably, and prepared to play. He asked the guy to listen with a reverent feeling. Ryu Young was angry with the old man for calling him a wooden head and idolizing himself. The guy thought that he would wait until the master grew old. However, before he could finish his nasty talk, the master began to play, and the boy immediately drew attention to the teacher. He masterfully walked along the strings with his fingers and played a beautiful melody. Just from one melody, everything around the boy seemed to be transformed into beautiful flowers and birds. All the animals around came to Sabu's house to listen to this work of art. The boy opened his mouth and listened in admiration as his mentor played. The old man laughed and said that the guy had a funny face, and then asked how he liked the playing of the great Sabu. This was the power of Bunresu. The master showed his hands and explained that Bunresu is not a fighting technique. It is rather a skill, and there are no specific rules, but if you study it, your palms will become as strong as a thread, which no sword can cut. The master continued saying that if you train, then not only the palm, but also the arms can also become stronger. In sword control, the main component is the thread that controls thunder, so it is necessary to master Bunresu, reaching at least the 6th level, and learn to play the Gyagyam well, or the guy's hands will be cut in half, and that's where Sabu finished his story. Bunresu first, and also how long it would take to reach the 6th level. The teacher said that this must be studied with patience and that it would take someone like our hero 10 years to master it. The surprised boy shouted that it would be better if the old man left him to study the Nurin Simbab. Because 10 years was too long, he said that he would teach him to play the Nagima. The master laughed and said that no one said that they would simply teach him to play. He only said that it was too early for someone like our hero to play the Gyagyam. Handing the instrument to the guy, the old man said that first the young man should learn to play something easier. The old man also added that he thinks that the boy is ready for martial arts, and from tomorrow they will begin the basics. The boy was surprised when the master spoke about the basics. He asked what they had studied before. The old man laughed and said that all this was necessary to eliminate muscle pain and prepare the young man's body for study. While the guy was remembering everything that he had gone through, from the beating to the bears, the old man said that everything was clear, and also added that tomorrow the guy would come to the backyard. The next day, the boy came to the backyard and asked the mentor if this was really a martial arts class. Having finished all the housework, our hero comes to the backyard. The weather was wonderful outside, clear blue sky and warm sun. Approaching the teacher, the guy decided to make sure whether this was really a martial arts lesson, to which he received the answer that the old man had no need to deceive and handed him a knife. Sabo ordered the boy to stop asking stupid questions and try to hit the cones of the tree opposite him by pointing his finger at it. After listening to important advice on the topic that the guy needs to rely not only on strength, he stood 15 meters from the tree and prepared to throw a knife. The master ordered his student to use Yonsa Simgyol and also to control the energy and breathing of his body with the help of Narinsimboba. Having imagined the vector between the knife and his target, having fulfilled all the insistence of his teacher, our hero with a serious face throws the knife with all his might. The knife flew in the right direction with great speed and accuracy, and the guy with a surprised face, who did not expect that he could throw the knife so hard, thought that he had hit, but the master upset him by saying that he had missed. Sabo told the young student that from this distance he must hit the target exactly in order to move to the next level. Devaluing the student's efforts, he assumed that the boy would need about 4 months to learn. After this, the master continued and said that in the second stage the guy should double the distance and train until he can hit at least half the time. Brushing aside the student's request to stay and explain everything more delicately, the master turned away and left, saying that he had told everything the guy needed and assumed that the boy would pass the second level only in 2 months. Ryu Yong was upset and thought that self-study would take about 10 months, but gathering all his courage, the guy wanted to prove that he was not so bad. He said that he would not leave the teacher alone and would get caught only so that the master would not live seemed like honey. Running up to the tree and bending down to the ground, the guy with a tired look reached for a knife. Although he was tired, he had enough fortitude not to give up. The boy continued to train hard, standing in front of a tree and throwing a knife. He insisted to himself that it was as easy as shelling pears, and with the speed of the wind he tried to throw the knife exactly at the target. After 3 months of hard training, our hero stood in his usual place. This time, there was no longer a huge number of cones in front of him. They were all on the ground. The guy stood with a proud look and understood that he was already calmly hitting from a distance of 15 meters. After another 3 months, Ryu Yong was already able to reach twice the distance without any problems. He was very proud of his success, because it seemed to the guy that it would take him 4 whole months longer than it took in the end. Our young hero proudly and joyfully ran to Sab to show his achievements, shouting that he had got it. He ran into the old man's room. On the boy's neck hung a homemade chain of pine cones, which he knocked down with a knife. The guy ran into the room with a smile from ear to ear, his eyes filled with joy. The master and student went to the training ground we were already familiar with, where young Ryu Yang showed all his skills, which he honed in 6 months. The teacher praised the boy for his efforts, and was surprised that only 6 months had passed, and he was already throwing so well, and the speed was such that you can see only once every 100 years. The guy, of course, was happy with the praise, but began to complain again that Sabu was overloading him with household chores, to which the teacher asked the student to stop whining. Sabu took out a bag and handed it to the boy. The boy was surprised and decided to see if it was a gift for him, to which he heard a positive answer. The teacher did not forget that the guy's birthday was in 2 days, and also praised him for his progress in his studies. The boy was wary, wondering if the teacher had fallen ill with something serious, since this was not at all like him. But it was clear from his face that he was pleased by this care. The teacher got angry and hit the boy on the top of the head with his fist, saying that apparently the boy did not want to take his gift, to which he received a negative answer. The guy really wanted to take this gift. At an awkward moment, the teacher and student became a little embarrassed, and the old man asked the guy to stretch his hands forward. The guy stretched them out, and the teacher began to rummage in the bag. Taking out round bracelets for his arms and legs, Sabu put them on. Ryu Yona laughed, calling the bracelets Mokhuan, and adding that this is a trend among young people. The boy, looking tired, bent down and got angry that these were ordinary heavy shackles, to which he heard the answer from the master that this was both training and beauty. 2 in 1. Putting on a serious face, the mentor explained that each bracelet weighs 12 kilograms, and the guy should not take them off anywhere, not during training, not in the toilet, not in the bathroom. The boy, with dissatisfied cries, calculated that in total the 4 bracelets weighed 48 kilograms, and calling them light was a complete lie. The teacher knew about the guy's intentions to go to his parents' grave, so he added that the bracelets should not be removed without his permission. He also added that he could appear at any time, anywhere. After hanging 2 cones on a tree branch and pushing them in 2 different directions, the teacher suggested starting a new lesson in knife throwing. Swinging the cones on a rope, the teacher said that until now, the boy had only hit standing targets and he should start hitting moving targets. Sabu said first to hit from a distance of 15 meters, to which the student objected and asked to take off the muhwans, because he would not be able to hit with them. The boy insisted that the master's only student could be left without arms, to which he received the answer that Sabu never had weak or whining students. The master continued that Ryu Young has already learned Yonsasim Yeol and Nair Young Shimbab, so this task should be the easiest for him, also adding that the guy lacks diligence. As you already well guessed, our young hero did not despair. With an expression on his face full of seriousness and masculinity, the guy threw the knife with the word that he should hit, but he missed. The old man approached the cones and was about to decide that it seemed the guy would have to start everything from scratch, when the student interrupted him and said that the whole problem was in this method of training, and looked at the master with a grin. The old man looked at the student with a dissatisfied face and said that he could not stand forever and shake this bump. Then old man Sabu thought about it and said that it would be better if Ryu Yong himself will shake the cone and then throw the knife from a long distance. The master began his lecture by introducing the Phoenix technique, which he began to tell the boy about, saying that it was time to learn this technique. The teacher continued that the Phoenix technique is a movement technique. The body should move as if it were a fiery bird. The series of moves includes Gyeonggan, Shinbob, and Bobob. The old man, imagining what this technique looks like, continued to say that Gyeonggan assumes that the body with the lightness of a feather moves quickly, for a long time, and as far as possible. Shinbob is similar to Gyeonggan, but in the teachings it was said that Shinbob is a technique that allows you to control weight, position, and body shape. Without stopping even for a minute, Sabo continued to rattle off his lecture with great enthusiasm. He said that this technique allows you to strengthen the body, or spin in the air. He added that sometimes people use chokolgun, which is a type of shinbob that allows one to reduce body size. And finally, the teacher ends his lecture by talking about the bob technique, which allows you to move your arms and legs very quickly, like a ghost in a fight with an opponent. He ended by saying that this technique allows you to speed up the body. Tortured and tired, our hero says that this is very tempting, but with surprise he asked if it would all be in shackles. The teacher's answer was not long in coming. Sabu said that this was certainly correct, and since everything was clear, then it was worth starting with Dilpunyonim, which is the basis of this technique. He also added that this technique would be useful to the student on the way to his parents' cemetery. This wonderful and bewitching technique in action. After a short time, Sabu and his student try to teach the young man the technique, but so far he hasn't succeeded, so the teacher hits the boy on the back. Running away from the teacher, Ryu Young hears that if he does not learn this technique, the teacher will beat him all night. Then the boy runs away without looking back. After a while, our hero, tired, sits at the grave of his parents and picks off overgrown weeds and excess grass there. While going about his business, the guy feels the gaze of some shadow on him from all sides and from every bush. Then, being a little intimidated, he turns away from the ominous shadow. When the shadow approaches our hero, he is seriously frightened and falls to the ground, throwing off his bracelets and receiving a stunning blow from his mentor. Sabu dumped poor Ryu Yona, who was unconscious on his shoulders and humming some melody, went home. When the boy woke up, there was a heavy downpour outside. Ryu Yong was frightened when he saw his mentor, and at the same moment began to run away screaming at the top of his voice. The surprised teacher, looking at all this, did not understand why he was yelling so much while running, wasting extra energy on it. But still, he praised that the student was able to learn a lot in half a month. Sabu thought it was time. Having run, our hero falls exhausted to the ground, but the master, turning his back to his student, ordered him to shake this bump himself and practice throwing knives. Sabu added that as long as his student did not hit from a distance of 30 meters, he should not be bothered. The rain passed and the gloomy clouds left. The bright and warm sun came out. Beautiful dew glinted on every blade of grass. The master was in his yard, enjoying the good weather. He lay and ate, drinking sake from a jug. Our young hero runs to his mentor, shouting that he has learned to hit a moving target from 30 meters. It was clear that the boy was very tired, but he did not give up. What did the master answer? The master, as usual, was annoyed that he again had to teach the young man something. Lying down and drinking sake, he was irritably surprised that the guy learned in just 4 months, which Ryu Young objected that the master should stop drinking and teach him something. Sabu did not move from his place. He handed the boy chopsticks and told him to take these chopsticks and go study. With great surprise, the boy took the chopsticks from his mentor in bewilderment with a questioning expression on his face. The lying old man, who did not move from his place, said that the young man should try to hit the target with the stick that he had just given him. Sabu reached into his pocket, opened the bag that was lying there, put his hand in the bag and rustled a little. After that, he pulled out a gold coin and said that Ryu Yong hung it instead of a pine cone. This was the new target. The boy began to be indignant and think that the teacher was too annoying to teach him something. The guy continued his indignation, saying that he would never fight with chopsticks and that it was a waste of time. The old man, with a dissatisfied face, waved his hand and asked why the guy thought that he would never fight without a blade. He added that for a real master, a bird's feather is a tool. During these words, a bird flew over the master's head. The old man narrowed his eyes and ordered the boy to look carefully. At that moment, Sabu threw a chopstick. What do you think happened next? Of course, this great master hits the bird and it sharply rushes to fall. How did our boy react? The young main character opened his mouth in great surprise. The guy had never seen anything like this before. He was both fascinated and surprised. It was incredible. The bird was dead. The teacher, with a proud face, hoped that he had convinced his young student that a stick could also become a terrible weapon. He ordered the student to fry the bird and put the feather aside. Time passed and snow fell. All the foliage disappeared, and the trees remained bare and ugly. The master was sitting and spending time by the fire when a huge tigress approached him. She showed him her belly, and Sabu saw that she gave birth to tiger cubs. The tigress began to pretend to be cute and get out in front of the old man. The master suggested that the tigress wanted sake, but he didn't really want to share and sat next to him without moving. Finally, the master turned to the tigress, stood up and said that if she wants to drink, then let her sit quietly and not touch anything while he is not here. The tigress sat down by the fire and quietly waited for the old man, warming herself. She was so huge that she could easily eat the poor old man, but she was meek and kind to him, so she calmly waited. Suddenly, our hero comes running with terrible screams and is frightened by the tigress sitting quietly by the fire. The master was not around, so what did he decide to do? The young man assumed that the tigress killed his master and hid his corpse under a blanket, and then sat down calmly and warmed herself by the fire. From the guy's terribly loud screams, the tigress stood up and became alert, took a stance, and carefully watched her possible opponent. Tigress began to head a little towards Ryu. Yona looked at him with a wild, mad, and angry look, ready to tear the boy apart. At that moment, the tigress jumps on the boy with her mouth open, ready to swallow the student whole. The guy got scared and shouted that he would take revenge for the teacher's death sometime later when he became an adult. After these words, some kind of stone flies at the tigress. Most likely it was the teacher, who called the tigress Little White and said that he told her not to touch anything. Immediately the tigress roared loudly and fell unconscious, and Ryu Young was very happy to see the teacher, although the teacher was unhappy, and said that he did not like the student's words that he would take revenge somehow later, and called the student ungrateful. The master stood with a dissatisfied expression on his face, letting go of his mouth after a warm home. A jug of booze hung on his belt, and in his hands he was holding some kind of bowl of food. The frightened boy, pointing at the sleeping tigress, objected to the mentor, and said that he could not take revenge on the tigress if she defeated the master, because he lacked skill. Also, the restless boy asked in high tones what the tigress was doing at their house, and the answer was received instantly. The master sat down and said that he knew this tigress even before meeting the guy. By this moment, the animal had already woken up. The master introduced her as White and showed her to the guy. The young man was very surprised that they had known each other for a long time, and called her name stupid. The tigress stood up and, licking her lips, abruptly approached Sabu, who was drinking sake. The boy got scared again and shouted that she wanted to eat the teacher, to which Sabu received a calm answer that it was as if the boy wanted to be eaten. Ryu Yang was not at home. Sabu decided to cook himself a delicious meal. He warned the guy that the meat he was frying was lamb, and it should be eaten with warm sake, because it was good for older people. So he ordered the guy not to touch the meat. He also added that if little lazy boys eat this meat, they will have a stomach ache. With the usual dissatisfied face, the guy objected that if the master was already lying, then let him do it more believably. Besides, he came earlier because he completed the task. Satisfied, Sabu, who had prepared for the meal, told the boy that he had already said that the next task would be to hit the soybean with a feather. The tigress sitting next to him drank sake avidly. To everyone's surprise, the guy threw a feather into a bowl of dates that stood between the tigress and the master. For some reason, the tigress was wary, but the young man continued that now he could hit anything with a feather. The little white girl became even more serious and her eyes sparkled. The teacher took a deep breath and hinted that the guy shouldn't have thrown the pen there. The tigress jumped up and growled at the top of her lungs. Her eyes were bright, and seemed to glow with anger. She was very angry with the boy. Luckily for Ryu Yona, the tigress was quickly reassured by the master, showing that her fiends were safe and sound and she had nothing to worry about. Our hero was seriously frightened and began to ask in surprise, and at the same time in a trembling voice, why the tigress was behaving this way, because these were dates. Sabu explained that the tigress just really doesn't like it when someone touches her food, and the guy was even more shocked by what he saw. Before that, he didn't think that there were tigers who drink sake and eat dates. After her meal, Belenkaya, with a funny growl, began to spit bones from under the dates at the boy, so to speak. She took revenge on him. After the tigress taught the boy a lesson, the bruised boy walked closer to the fire, muttering indignation under his breath that the tigress could have been kinder to him. Approaching the fire, the guy complained that he was cold and decided to warm up with everyone else by the fire. The boy decided to stretch out his hands to the tigress when the master pouring sake asked him what he was doing, and warned him that if he wanted to touch her, he would part with his hands. Out of fright, the boy jumped back and moved his hands far away from the animal. It was already clear that the tigress might have wanted to bite him, but fortunately, everything turned out okay. Eating the cooked meat, the old man with a smile on his face said that Belenkaya was not a pet, and that she was at least 10 times older than the boy. With his mouth open in surprise, the boy suggested that the old man add the word auntie to the tigress, because she was 110 years old. With his mouth full, the old man said that the young man was talking nonsense, but soon admitted that people often tell him that he looks younger than his age. Without surprise, the guy imagined in his head that the old man could be more than 110 years old. But then he thought that after a short amount of time, Sabu would begin to call himself a sacred spirit and did not want to continue the conversation. Having finished eating his delicious dishes, the old man wiped his hands and stood up with a proposal to go check something. He said that this time we need to see everything with our own eyes. Dropping a jug from under sake on the ground, the boy saw that it was completely empty, after which the guy was indignant that the master did not even leave a sip and drank it all. It was snowing. There was beautiful winter weather outside. Everything was white, and the earth was covered with its blanket. The guy, the master, and the tigress were going somewhere. The master warned that if Ryu Yong will lag behind, he will tell Belenka to drag the young man with her teeth. The guy didn't like it. As it turned out, they were going to the training ground, where Ryu had been spending almost all of his time lately. Yong was training. Having laid the tigress down, the old man lay down on her and asked her to demonstrate the progress of the boy's training. The boy was surprised that the master was asking him about this and decided to show him everything step by step. The first thing he showed was that he first shook the target with his fingers. After that, using the phoenix technique, he very quickly ran away from the target. Standing at a great distance from the target, the guy took the pen in his hands and got ready. He concentrated and took a stance, where there was a lot of energy around him, and he himself glowed as if he were a clot of some kind of energy. The old man lying on Belenkaya was a little surprised that the boy was already fluent in Yonsa Simgyol. Continuing his story about the training, the boy said that at the moment when the target is visible, taking into account the speed and direction of the wind, and the movement of the target, Ryu Yong throws the feather. It flew with incredible precision and power. It seemed as if he had broken through an invisible barrier of wind. At this moment, even the tigress stood up from such force and speed of the throw. She and the master watched this miracle with great surprise. The boy hit the target. The feather pierced the center of his tiny target from a great distance. The surprised old man thoughtfully began to think that this was all very strange, and the young man could not reach this level so quickly. Our proud and happy Ryu Young began to praise himself and ask for recognition from the old man, calling himself a special boy. Surprise disappeared from the old man's face. Only the tigress did not understand what and how. But the master at that moment had already come to some conclusion, and asked the boy to come up. The smile left the boy's face. Our hero was afraid that the old man was jealous because of his talent and wanted to beat the young man. Realizing that the boy did not want to approach him, he began to give orders to the tigress to bring the boy to him at the end of his sentence. The frightened guy, using the phoenix technique, very quickly appeared near the master and sat down on his knees opposite him. A dialogue ensued between the student and the teacher. Sabu asked how well the guy speaks Bunresu, to which he received the answer that it was nothing special. Putting his palm out in front of the guy, the teacher asked to remove his hand using Bunresu, and the blow should be as strong as possible. Surprised and at the same time joyful, the guy began to reason out loud that as a student he could not afford to hit the teacher, but at the same moment he answered himself that, on the other hand, he could not resist orders. The resulting smile did not leave the guy's face. He tensed his hands and had fun knowing that now he could take revenge for all the times Sabu beat him. With great pride on his face, the guy stood up and began to prepare for the blow, saying that the teacher left him no choice. Seeing how long and proudly the student was preparing, Sabu put a smile on his face and said that if he did not hit on the count of 3, the teacher himself would have to do it. The guy became completely serious about the teacher. He stood in his stance, raised his palm, and directed all his strength and energy into it. On the count of 3, there was a very strong and loud bang. The guy hit with all his speed and full force. 2 palms touched and a blow occurred. His face was filled with courage. His eyes seemed to glow with joy and pride. At this moment you can see how our hero has matured and gained courage. To the surprise of the guy, the teacher grabbed his hand and grabbed his head. He clearly thought of something bad for himself. Saying gotcha, he turned to the guy. The teacher was very serious. There was no joy or grin on his face. He was absolutely serious and stern. The teacher asked the guy what he was taking secretly from him. Brushing off Sabu, Ryu Young, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, said that he did not understand what the mentor was talking about. The teacher explained to the young student why he made such conclusions. Showing the hand that the guy hit, he said that he felt his strength in his hand, and he did not understand how the young man was able to reach such a high level in such a short period of time. To which he received an answer from the student that there was no power, since the teacher was sitting in front of him intact and safe. With a calm face, the mentor continued his speech. He said that while he was looking at the guy's throws, he realized that his skill had already exceeded this level. Sabu added that the young man's Bunresu level was already 4th, and the Narenshi Bob was so developed that such a guy can achieve after at least 7 years of training. The teacher also pointed out the guy's eyes, to which Ryu Young looked at his mentor with a surprised and incomprehensible face. The master continued his story about the eyes. He said that when one comprehends Narenshi Bob too quickly, then in the process of studying due to inexperience, it is difficult to clearly separate the internal forces, and therefore this manifests itself in the eyes as a side effect. Then the master made a dissatisfied face and pointed his finger at the student. He said that if we draw a conclusion from everything he said earlier, then the guy would not have been able to reach such a high level so quickly if he had not eaten anything extra. These words plunged the guy into a stupor. At the same time, trembling with fear, he shouted that he was not to blame for anything. The guy, after a short pause, fell to his knees, covered himself with his hands, and began to say that his only fault was that he was born a poor child prodigy. Making a sad and tear-stained face, the guy said that he just trained hard and finally achieved success. So did Ryu Young accuse the teacher of scolding the guy instead of praising him. Taking a breath of air, the guy continued that of the two of them. Only Sabu eats food without him. The teacher turned away sharply, saying that the student was whining again, told him not to make a show and ordered him to follow him. The boy stood up and ran after his mentor. The teacher, walking in front, added that if the guy gets caught next time, he will get it from him. Sabu's fears that Ryu Young ate something and it didn't go anywhere, but the boy walking behind said that he didn't take anything. However, in his head, the young man was afraid that he almost got burned, and that the master was very quick-witted. It's the 22nd day. The clock shows 22 hours and 45 minutes. It's cloudy outside. The sun makes its way through the cracks in the clouds and shines on the white snow. Having dressed warmly, our hero went into the forest to find greenery. On his back there was a basket to put everything he found, and in his hands there were 2 knives. The guy was indignant that because of the cold night he would not be able to find greenery in the forest, and was also afraid that a bear might appear. Seeing mushrooms in the forest, the guy was very happy that he could at least pick them. They grew near some tree and were crushed by the snow. The boy came closer, sat down next to these mushrooms, put one knife on the ground, and was upset that there were not enough mushrooms. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the guy heard some very pleasant and strange smell. It was very similar to the smell of some flowers. Surprised by this, our hero decided to find out what this wonderful smell was, and he went around the tree near which he wanted to pick mushrooms. When he walked around the tree, his surprise knew no end. With his mouth wide open in surprise, he became stunned. The guy sat down next to him, threw down his tools, and couldn't stop looking at this beautiful plant. Having come even closer and began to examine the plant, he could not understand whether it was a flower or a berry, but all he understood was that in such cold weather, and with such a smell, ordinary plants do not grow. It was something unusual. Having become so fascinated by this plant, his eyes began to glow. He was eager to find out what it was. The boy began to carefully dig up this wonderful plant. He hoped that Sabu would be happy even if he only brought this plant. With sophistication and great care, young Ryu Young began to dig up the plant with its roots. Burning his fingers with cold, the guy continued his work. The way he carefully dug up the flower could be compared to jewelry work. Having dug quite hard into the ground around the flower and reached the root, the guy was very surprised. What was there? The root looked very much like a man who was holding a bag behind his back. In his other hand, he was holding some kind of thing. There were beads on his neck, and a stem of that same plant was growing from the top of his head. The root introduced itself as ginseng and said that it could strengthen the youth's health for the rest of his life. At the moment when the guy took out the plant with the root added that people say that it looks like a person, and that's why they call it a ginseng doll. The tired guy finally got up holding the plant with the root in his hands, and they say that the root almost fooled him. Still, both the flower and the root were beautiful. The boy began to think that this was probably one of those plants that fool people, and also added that this was the best healing plant about which there were legends. Our hero couldn't get enough of his find. He stood still and examined the plant. He began to reason that now he could go to the market and sell ginseng, and then start saving for his escape. But then he talked himself out of this idea, thinking that he was too young to go to the market with such expensive things. Then the guy decided to straighten his brains out and explained that there are more valuable things in life than money, and also added that this is why he endures all the humiliation of Sabu. Having filled his head with a bunch of different thoughts, the guy decided that he would simply eat this plant. Raising this plant to the sky and looking at this plant with his childish eyes, he understood that if he ate it, his body would get stronger faster, and he could quickly become an invincible master. The boy became thoughtful, and somehow the smile quickly left his face. He sat down on the ground and began to think about how to eat this plant, and began to remember what Sabu told him. The guy remembered how he saw that the master was eating something unknown to him, and he was afraid that this food could be poisonous, to which he received the answer that it was Nadan, and it was hard to find. The master continued his story that Nadan is the part of the animal's body where all the chi energy is concentrated, and that such as Ryu Young shouldn't eat this, because it could end badly, so the boy should bring such things to him. Then the angry boy again began to be capricious, and asked to be told about the rules, because the teacher said that this food cannot be eaten without rules, because you can fall into a state of juvaibma, or even die. Also in the boy's memories were the words of the master, where he said that there was no point in telling the young man because he would not remember all the rules the first time, but the student still insisted on telling the story. While meditating, our hero began to remember all the rules. He remembered that when taking medicinal plants, it is necessary to follow a diet until the body completely masters the power of these plants. You need to not eat or sleep for several days. Nothing will happen from this. It is necessary for the healing properties and the internal strength of the body to be reunited into one. Taking the root in his hands, the guy continued to remember the rules. The next rule stated that sweet medicines like Dewan Dan, if they are not fake, then they can be taken without special instructions. And when taking medicinal plants with yin or yang properties, which have properties vary greatly in relation to each other, if special instructions are not followed, side effects may appear, and therefore, taking into account the state of your body, it is necessary to maintain the ratio of benefit and harm. Having brought the plant to his mouth, he continued to pronounce the rules to himself, and the third rule stated that the medicinal plant is taken half an hour after a meal. When taken before meals, there will be no side effects, but the stomach may not digest it, and when taken with food, it is beneficial. Properties may lose their effect. However, there was an exception that when taking ginseng, you need to not eat anything fatty for 10 days, and you need to prepare your body. And on the day of taking it, you need to eat on an empty stomach. It needs to be chewed slowly and thoroughly, starting with the berry and ending roots. Thinking that every day our young hero ate only greens, he put ginseng berries in his mouth. Instantly he tensed up. His body was overflowing with energy. There were so many chi particles that he could barely contain them. The boy found himself in his inner world of Biryuan. He had to move there with caution, because there are differences from reality there. On your way, Ryu Yang met a man who was exactly the same ginseng root that he had just eaten. The man turned to the guy, and said that he did not have enough strength to master him. Showing his glove with stones, the man shouted that with one click he would turn our hero into dust. Before he can finish speaking, the guy flies into his opponent and kicks him in the face. Ryu Yang was not as weak as his opponent estimated him to be, for which he himself paid. Grabbing the man by the neck, our hero thanked the plant and said that it was the best herb he had ever eaten. After saying goodbye to his opponent, Ryu Yang snapped his fingers in front of his face. At that second, with terrible screams, his opponent began to decompose and turned into dust. Although there was not even any dust left from him, he simply disappeared. With great surprise, the young man woke up and asked himself if he had succeeded. There was still a lot of energy around him. Exhaling with relief, the guy felt that his body had become very light. He compared it to the wind. Just like Ryu Yang felt a lot of power in his veins, comparing it to the feeling of eating 100 bears. When our hero fully woke up, he expected to remain in this state longer, and decided that it was worth going home, and not telling his mentor anything. Thoughts and assumptions began to enter the guy's head about what would happen if the teacher found out about his hikes and what he had just eaten. He imagined that the master would call him ill-mannered and that he had to give this herb to him or at least share it, and he would not be able to forgive the student, and therefore would kill him. In the second assumption, the boy imagined that the master would hang him like a pine cone on a tree and beat him. They say that this is a very valuable herb, and that he would immediately pull it out of his stomach. The guy firmly and confidently decided that he would not tell anything and was already getting up, getting ready to go, when suddenly something went wrong. What could have happened? Suddenly, out of nowhere, the master finds the guy and grabs him by the shoulder. The frightened guy didn't know what to do. The master turned the boy to face him and began to speak. Sabu began to scold the student that he had not been home since yesterday, and he already thought that he had been eaten or died from the cold. The master began to ask where the boy was hanging around. With great surprise on his face, the guy began to ask that he had really been gone for the second day. He himself forgot how he left yesterday. Then the guy pretended to become forgetful at the post of overwork, as expected, Sabu believed, to which the little one considered him naive. However, apparently the boy's plan failed. When they arrived home, the master handed a sheet with a new daily schedule to the student. Looking at the list, the student began to complain that there were tasks from 5 to 11 in the morning without stopping, for every half hour, and he also needed to hunt between them. The guy asked why it was impossible to move the tasks to the second part of the day, which was completely free. The lying master with a grin on his face said that his student had become stronger and he could do anything. Apparently Sabu understood everything from the very beginning and was simply playing the naive fool. And in the end, our little and inexperienced Ryu turned out to be the most naive of all Yong. The boy with a joyful and happy face and great hope began to ask the master if he would teach him something in the afternoon. To which, with even greater surprise, the boy heard that starting tomorrow, he would go down from the mountains to people. The master with a smile on his face said that it was time for the student to know the world. The weather was excellent, clear. The sun was shining on the huge sharp rocks, and the clouds were passing through them. From the mountains you can see a fairly large village with a huge number of houses. Apparently it either seems so small from above, or is simply overpopulated. But we can say with confidence that life is in full swing there. Entering the city, our hero opened his mouth in surprise. It was his first time in this village and he couldn't get enough of the beautiful views and beautiful architecture. After the master's words that the student's eyes were bulging too much and a request to go faster, the guy woke up and began asking where they were going. After the master's words that the guy would soon find out everything, young Ryu Yong became wary and thought that the old man was behaving too strangely. Before leaving, our hero remembered how the master pointed to his student's outfit, asking what kind of outfit it was. The guy dressed in a turquoise kimono and some kind of fur coat replied that the master himself said to dress neatly, because they would go to the village. Hitting the top of the student's head with a stick, the old man said that it looked like the boy decided to pretend to be a tramp, and added that in such an outfit, no one would choose him. The stunned guy, who had not yet recovered from the blow, asked what choice they were talking about, and added that the master had not said where and for what purpose they were going. Coughing, the mentor said that when they get there, the boy himself will find out everything and guess Sabu's great plan. Having scolded the student, the master shouted at him to immediately change into something clean and comfortable, and also forced him to lower his bangs, because the young man's yellow eyes stood out very much. Approaching a huge building, the guy stopped and began to stare at one of the largest buildings in the village. A tall building with several floors with huge steps and a green sign on the threshold. Some girls were walking along the first floor. At the bottom of the steps stood the merchant Chen, who politely addressed the old man. The master wanted his student to perform on stage, but Chen refused, saying that the guy looked about 11 years old, and he could not allow him to perform, especially since he was a boy. From the dissatisfied face of our hero, it was already possible to understand that he did not like this whole idea, and the master asked the merchant if he was refusing because of his age, appearance, and gender. Squatting down, Sabu hugged his student, and added that although he is young, and even a boy, he has no equal in playing the tangent, and he will play, just organize a stage. The guy became even more dissatisfied and angry that they wanted to sell him. Frightened, Chen began to explain that the guests of the Chungyangru wine glass should enjoy not only their ears, but also their eyes. Even among the girls there is a strict selection. The angry teacher, pointing his finger at the merchant, said that he was very disappointed in his principles. Chen just quietly apologized, and the guy sighed with relief and said that so far everything was fine. An angry teacher, his face red with anger, shouted to the whole street that this was unthinkable, that only girls were needed everywhere, and that playing an instrument was not important. Sabu said that the student should remember today's offense and become better, to which he received the answer that the old man should calm down. Looking down at the ground, the guy said in a frustrated voice that he was hoping to learn something new, but in the end, the master wanted to sell his only, kind, poor, gifted, and underage student. After dismissing the student, the teacher turned his back to him and said that he did not have such a student. He also added that he just hoped that his talkative student would learn something new today. Raising his head, the angry student pointed his finger at the master and accused him, saying that forcing a guy to play the tangent in a drink shop is a crime of human trafficking. Sabu approached the boy, twisted his arm and grabbed him by the collar. Calling the boy a talkative pest, he was unhappy that the boy would contradict him. Our young hero continued to scream at the top of his voice, calling his teacher a criminal slave trader and accusing him of murdering an underage boy, that is, himself. Sabu finally knocked out his student. He threw him over his shoulders and began to leave the village. Using his phoenix technique, the master disappeared very quickly. All that was left of him was the dust that rose into the air from the fast speed. People looked into the distance of the road along which the old man disappeared and were, to put it mildly, in shock. The master brought the guy to a deserted place and decided to talk. The guy thought that Sabu wanted to fool him, but if he yelled, I would immediately beat him. The teacher started a dialogue and asked what Ryu thought Yona is a glass drinker. The boy replied that this is a place where they sell alcohol, and the teacher said that the guy knows little about life and that the guy doesn't understand how much his mentor cares about him. Approaching the guy closer, the teacher made a terrible grimace and began to explain that the wine bar is a place where people of different classes gather and chat about this and that. Sabu continued to add that all the information is concentrated there, and this is a place for young people like his student to have the opportunity to plan how to change the world. From the very beginning, the guy didn't really believe in the words and care of the teacher, and the teacher continued adding that the boy could earn money there and improve his skills in playing the tangem, but the guy immediately realized that making money was the main reason. The boy understood everything and said that he should sum it up. Ryu Yang failed everything, and if so, he suggested they go home. Grabbing the student by the shoulders, the full-of-energy teacher said that there was no word in his dictionary to fail, and he would never abandon his student. He added that they had many places that still needed to be visited, but the dissatisfied youth said that the master would rather give up. Having finished his conversation, the teacher turned away from the guy and went to the nearest house. Sabu asked the guy to wait for him near the house, and he went inside. After a short period of time, the master ran out with a satisfied face and a huge bag behind his back. The student, who was in shock, asked what kind of bag the master had, but he hurriedly replied that he would explain everything later, and now they needed to hurry. After walking a little, they stopped at another house. The master again asked the student to wait for him there and went into the house. The boy watched the master standing and talking to some woman. The anxiety did not disappear from his thoughts. He was tense at every moment, and the more time passed, the more it stressed him. Sabu's back, he added that she just looked at him and then gave these bags. But the master again said that the guy would find out everything then, and now they need to go to the next place. It was the most important according to the teacher. The guy followed his mentor and watched as Sabu walked forward mindlessly humming some melodies. Our hero did not understand why he was not telling anything and what the old man was up to. Approaching a house, the guy realized that it was a forge. Saying Changwachan out loud, he added that the word means a place where iron takes on a new look. Entering our heroes, we were greeted by a man with a bandage on his forehead, white hair and pumped-up arms. Apparently, this was the blacksmith. He told Sabu that he didn't need a boy like him, and joked that maybe he should make a sword the size of a boy. After laughing, the old man suggested going into the room and discussing all the details inside. Ryu Yang began to hope that perhaps the old man wanted to order a sword especially for him. Screams were heard from the room in which the blacksmith and the old man were talking. The angry teacher did not understand why the blacksmith was refusing him, and the man proved to the master that the guy was completely green. The boy stood and heard Sabu trying to prove that Ryu Yang is 15 years old and has 3 times more strength than an ordinary man. Having heard this, the guy did not understand what Sabu was talking about, because he would soon turn only 12. The old man became even angrier after learning about the amount of 2 silver coins. He continued to prove that Ryu Yang is not an ordinary boy, and he can easily lift a 30-kilogram piece of iron. He will replace 3 or 4 workers for you. The heated argument continued. The master offered 2 silver coins and daily payments. He still defended his point of view that Ryu Yona has a young body full of strength, and then he generally said that he was waiting for 3 silver coins and daily payments. The boy himself still didn't like it and had goosebumps all over his body. The blacksmith agreed to the old man's conditions, and then he said with a joyful face that for this price, he would give him the boy, and that the blacksmith would take care of him. Hearing this, a perplexed Ryu Yang was in shock. Our hero had just been sold to a forge. He couldn't believe that he had been sold so cheaply. Then Ryu Yang suggested that the old man from the forge could be a pervert who loves underage children, and therefore he was sold for one night. The boy was both in great shock and very afraid. When the old man and the blacksmith came out, the master told the guy that from that day on, he would work in this forge, so he should stand up and say hello. The boy still didn't understand anything, but he was already glad that he was not sold for the night. But the thought that a blacksmith's work is one of the hardest in this regard did not please him at all. The angry guy, pointing his finger at the teacher, began shouting that work in the forge was hard, dirty, and unsafe, and in general, how could Sabu sell him and do this to him? Before he could finish saying that he would not work here, The mentor jumped up to the young man and covered his mouth with his palm and told the blacksmith that he would go away and talk with his student. The master took the student away from the forge and said that he would be right back. Having gone around the corner, the trainer began to hammer into our hero's head that work is part of training, and in general how he is going to become an invincible martial arts master if he cannot overcome the simplest test. Shouting at the student, he added that while the boy was pounding iron, he would gain strength, his hands would become stronger, and he would also learn patience. So this would all help him. The mentor said, not to whine and work hard. However, the angry boy began to shout at the teacher in response that he understood the real reason. He added that Sabu just wanted to harness the boy so that he would earn him money. The guy firmly decided that it was necessary to attack the master with rational arguments. To repel his fooling, he continued his speech. The boy said that such hard work as iron processing cripples the hands, and as a result, the sensitivity of the fingers disappears. But for studying and controlling Sword of Thunder, the sensitivity of the limbs of the body plays an important role. It turns out that this work will negatively affect his learning process. The old man laughed and told the boy not to worry about it. He said that his name is the Great Sabu, who can control the invincible Sword of Thunder, and that he has already thought of everything. The shocked guy decided to find out more about Sabu's plan and what he came up with, so he asked him to tell him everything. Laughter from the old man and a short pause in the dialogue, the old man began to turn away from the young man, and the guy stood with a question instead of a face and did not understand what was happening. The master said that he would tell everything later at home, and if the guy did a bad job and was kicked out, then punishment would follow, so he had to work. The most shocked guy began to shout after the master that he was an ordinary slave trader, but most likely, the teacher no longer heard anything, because he very quickly disappeared from the boy's eyes, with his bags on his back. Chelkvachan was written on the blacksmith's banner. It was 1 floor high, and its roof was made of straw. This forge has a huge furnace and specializes in making weapons. The building is equipped with all the necessary and high-quality equipment, and only here, nowhere else, can you buy first-class blades for mere pennies. The main customers of the forge were the Ami people, who live in the mountains. People from this nation were followers of women's martial arts. These followers live in the Boko Monastery in the Ami Mountains. At the founding of the monastery, the followers were both women and men, but over time it became considered a women's monastery. Under the leadership of Chief Master Sate, the main followers are unmarried girls, and this type of martial art mainly uses swords. Other customers are people who work for those same Ami, traders, visiting travelers, and in general, the most ordinary people. This forge could easily be called Amichan instead of its current name Chelkvachan. In general, in the entire village, if you think about it, it wouldn't hurt to add the prefix Ami to the name of each house. In this village, everyone is somehow connected with these followers. Everyone in this village was so imbued with followers of Ami that it was as if the silhouettes of these strong unmarried girls, who handled the sword at the highest level, hung over the village. According to residents, the owner of Chelkvachan is considered the best among blacksmiths, and therefore he's called a swordmaster. However, even he, when Ami's followers come to him to pick up an order, does not find a place for himself. It would seem that this healthy, huge, and strong man is a master of his craft, but still he is very worried about the quality of his work. Ami's followers, in saying that the sword was forged from high-quality steel, and also asked the opinion of a beautiful girl. The girl raised the sword higher towards the sun and praised the quality and length of the sword, but she made a complaint that the sword was too heavy. The lady continued to say that she specifically asked to make a sword of good quality, but as light as possible, and the girl also added that the sword was for the youngest same. Bowing, the young man began to explain that the sword was developed using special technology. First, they processed soft and hard steel separately. Then they ran 2 ingots 9 times, and therefore the sword may be heavy. But the guy added that if you compare it with other swords of this quality, it has the ideal weight. Ami's followers decided to be convinced of the young man's words, and one of the girls took another sword, after which the one holding the new sword hit the second girl's prepared sword. Hit! The swords crossed and hit each other. It was immediately clear that the girl who hit was a master of her craft. It was a light, fast, and incredibly strong blow. The blow was so strong that the sword that was hit broke into 2 parts. One of the parts flew towards the blacksmith with such great speed that he barely had time to sit under the counter out of fear with a frightened face. The beautiful girl holding the new sword in her hands said that the broken sword was quite good, but there wasn't even a scratch on the new one, and took back all the words about the weight claims. Turning to the little girl nearby, the adult follower Ami asked the girl to try the sword, and she readily agreed. The girl's name was Ryan Same. Taking a stance, the young girl began to swing her sword, receiving various questions from the older girls. Same said that she liked the sword, and that it was a little difficult for her, but she also added that she liked how shiny the blade was. The older girl handed the guy opposite a bag of money and said that since the girl liked the sword, they would buy it. She also asked to ask all the unflattering words, justifying it by the fact that she cared about the young creature. The frightened blacksmith said with relief that he was alive. Then Ryu Yong asked what was wrong with the blacksmith and suggested that they might have come to him to collect a debt, to which the blacksmith said that these girls were worse than death. Ryu Yong stood with some kind of huge hammer, and the blacksmith asked why he needed this weight, to which the boy said that the other guys were ready to work. But the boss was not there, and added that they told him to hit him lightly on the head with this, so that he would hurry up. The frightened master stood up and began to shout at the young man that hitting these could be fatal, and also added that he was already scared to death because of the last customers. Then Ryu Yong asked why the blacksmith was so afraid of Ami's followers. The man sighed and said that he didn't know, but added that they simply didn't like him, and because of them, he was afraid of the female silhouette in general. The blacksmith began to tell and remember the picture of how he once tried to sell a sword to Ami's followers and was very polite. However, the girls were very angry, or misunderstood him, and then calling him a pervert, they put blades to his neck and asked if he wanted to die. But the blacksmith added that they still order swords from him, and in order to find out their requirements, he has to communicate with them, so he does not conflict with them. The boy laughed and said, giggling, that the blacksmith's face is just the kind you want to put a sword to when you smile, and the master, in shock and tears, began to ask which part of the face. Changing the subject, the man held out a huge 30-kilogram hammer and said that Sabu asked him to give Ryu Yon has such a hammer. The blacksmith decided to find out if the boy could lift such a hammer, because adults have difficulty working even with a 9-kilogram hammer. In the forge, all the men were surprised that he was giving such a huge hammer to the little boy, and the guy himself was very unhappy in his head that Sabu had left a special request here too. Taking the hammer with a sigh, the boy asked how to do the job correctly. He walked over to the anvil and began pounding the sword until its surface became flat. At this time, everyone stared in surprise at our hero and marveled at his strength, calling him a strong man. Making a very sly face, the blacksmith asked where the guy was from and made a malicious smile and asked if he wanted to live with him, saying that his uncle would take care of him. The frightened guy almost hit the blacksmith with the same hammer, and then the blacksmith with a sad face asked why someone so kind was being treated so badly. A young man who was selling a sword to Ami's followers ran into the room and said that one of the followers told him a secret that perhaps soon many students would come to buy such swords in bulk, because they were of good quality and cost a penny. Our hero was also told that the little girl who received the sword today is the niece of the chief master Ami, and the boy with an awkward face decided to find out if such news would increase his work. The blacksmith grabbed the boy by the shoulders and began to shake him from side to side. He said that 2 months ago he increased his payment to 4 silver coins, and from next month he will give him 5. He also added that he will give good daily bonuses, the master said, that Ryu Young has only been working for them for 10 months, and for a newbie, this is simply an unrealistic salary. The boy said that he would probably refuse, because it is not he who spends the money, and especially since he has other things to do besides the forge. Using his ingenuity, the blacksmith realized that in order to solve this problem, he needed to talk to Sabu, to which Ryu Young condemned his master, saying that it was not beautiful. In the evening, the guy left the forge. Having no strength, he was indignant in his head that they had found a slave, and he could die like that. If it weren't for the ginseng doll, he would have already died. The guy recalled his first day when he came after work at the forge, and was met by a happy teacher who said that he had not had dinner, and was waiting for a student. During the meal, the hungry guy devoured the meat piece by piece, and the teacher said that after work the food tasted even better, and taking into account the guy's achievements, he allowed him to eat meat from that day on. The boy agreed that the food was certainly delicious, but he thought that the old man he was up to something, because if his conscience had awakened, he would not have sold the student. Our hero, tired but well fed, was in for another stunning news. Master said that once he finished have dinner, then they can begin their training, adding that the guy was afraid, lose sensitivity fingers _. Opening one of the bags that the master took back in the village, he showed the student a lot of beads and said that he already had a plan on how to help the student. Brushing off the potential work, the student began to act stupid and ask what a poor student like him, who had been working tirelessly all day, could do. The master pulled a needle out of his sleeve and said that, "Of course you can train with this." Ryu Yang didn't immediately understand what he pulled out of his sleeve. The master put his hand into the bag, began to collect a bunch of beads and gave an example to his student. They say that first you need to collect beads. After which he threw all the money into the air. A huge number of small multicolored balls were flying in the air. After which he instantly passed the needle and fishing line through each ball, and in the sky all the balls were connected with fishing line. It was very fast. The master showed the finished result, where 35 balls were folded in order in the colors of the rainbow on a thread 5 times. The surprised boy thought that Sabu had worked in a circus before becoming a criminal and child exploiter. The boy said out loud that he could return there now. The calm master, holding the finished work in his hands, told the student not to talk nonsense. He also added that this lesson would help him train the optic nerve, and also increase the accuracy and speed of hand movement. The most important thing is the ending, he told the guy to watch carefully. Then the master picked up the unfinished fishing line with beads, and with a slight movement of his hands began to tie the 2 ends. Having shown the finished result, he told the boy that this is how beads are made, and asked if the young man understood. With a formidable face, holding the beads in his hands, the master pointed out that each decoration should contain no more than 35 pieces of beads. No more and no less. He also added that in order to avoid a gap between the balls, you need to try to tie the ends well. And for the first time, Ryu let Yang start with 100 pieces a day. For each bead, they should be paid 2 bronze coins. The student began to shout at the mentor in a rage, saying that this was another job where the master would receive 6 silver coins a month, and also asked how much more Sabu planned to earn in exchange for the health of his only student. To which the coach replied that this was not all about money, but an ordinary training. But if the training generates income, then it will be 2 in 1. As the student continued to furiously accuse the teacher that this was not training, Sabu bent under the table and reached for the second bag, sticking out a bag full of something. The master asked if there was still a self-defense knife that his mentor had once given him, and added that he would do something with this knife every day, pointing to the bag. The guy didn't understand anything. The bag was filled to the very brim with wooden blocks. Sabu said that Ryuyong will have to create wooden products like a small souvenir Buddha or a comb, and the master himself will agree on the price. The pale guy asked the teacher directly if he wanted to make fun of him, to which he received a negative answer, that this was just another training method to restore the sensitivity of the fingers after the forge. Out of anger, the guy on the street shouted about how unscrupulous the old man was, and if the owner of the forge talked to him, the foreman would force him to work the night shift, and at the same time he would also send beads and beams to the forge and tell him to make fakes during the break. The guy walked and thought that at this rate, he would soon die. Passing by that same glass shop, the guy thought that playing the Gayageum in front of an audience would be much better than forging iron day and night in a forge. Autumn came. The green leaves were no longer there. All the leaves were yellow or red, as if the trees had changed into bright, multicolored dresses. Our hero walks through the autumn forest and talks about himself and his affairs. He hopes that he is doing everything right and thinks that due to overwork his mind may become clouded. The sighing guy walked and thought about how he could quickly cope with all his affairs, when suddenly a shadow instantly flashed over his head. Barely walking, the tired guy didn't even pay attention. He realized that he was thinking about the wrong thing, and thoughts that if he didn't run away, he might glue his fins together more and more often entered his head. That shadow was a ferocious monkey that jumped out at the guy with terrible screams, but the guy didn't even notice it. He was talking about what the damned old man had done to him and that someday he would be able to kick his ass. Not paying attention to his enemies, the guy reflexively threw stones at them, and fought back without even looking them in the eyes. The guy stopped thinking about all sorts of bad thoughts and realized that come what may, he decided to firmly continue saving money for his future. Ryuyong was so immersed in his thoughts that he just wanted to hit the log out of anger, and at that moment, he was fighting off the evil monkeys. The young man was upset that recently there had been a whole invasion of monkeys, and said that it would be better if they were wild boars because you can get meat and skin from them. At that moment, the guy asked out loud whether Sabu eats monkeys, and the monkeys heard it all from the shelters. They were seriously scared, of course. None of them wanted to be eaten. The guy came home and holding the monkey by the scruff of the neck, asked the master if this animal was edible, and that he had picked it up on the way home. Now the fate of this monkey was being decided. Waving off the student, he asked if he would eat this monkey, and said that the student brought one of his kind and wants to eat it. The trainer also added that Ryuyong ruined his mood and ordered him to throw away the animal and go cook dinner. The bored student brought the monkey to his face, shouted at the master that they were not alike, and also added that he plows all day, and when he returns he also cooks dinner. The angry mentor, without a mood, hit the table and stood up. He asked the student if he wanted Sabu himself to start cooking. His hair suddenly rose into the air, and some kind of ominous aura was visible around him. The frightened boy said that he should still cook because he was the youngest and tried to hide from the teacher's eyes as quickly as possible. The guy ran into another room. The old man, not understanding why he went there, shouted that he needed to go to the kitchen and why he dragged the monkey there, which he called Stinky. Agreeing with the words of the mentor, the guy threw the monkey and it, being very frightened, began to run away. The master was interested in what the guy was doing in the forge, and he decided to think about it. The guy, being in another room, hoped that the mentor did not notice that he had carried the bag behind his back. It was night outside, and an owl was sitting on a branch near the master's house with his student. What was our young hero doing at such a late time? At this time, the guy was practicing with beads. He skillfully threw these balls into the sky and connected everything together, as if he had been doing this for many years. Then he sat down to cut wood, making various figures and useful accessories. He also masterfully turned it all and did it with incredible speed. Looking out of the room, the guy saw that the master had fallen asleep, with a dissatisfied expression on his face. He looked at the old man and called him in his head an exploiter of children's powers. Entering his room, the guy sighed with relief and said that he could finally open the bag. He took the bag and began to untie it. This bag contained a skirt, powder, a comb, and a lot of different cosmetics. The guy decided to practice transforming into a woman. Having taken out the skirt, he could not understand how to put it on correctly, over trousers or on a naked body. He did not know, and had never looked at women's legs. Having applied the powder to his face, the guy remembered that he had been told to powder his cheeks with it. So John added that so as not to recognize him as a boy, he needed to apply more. Taking a lip brush and dipping it into lipstick, the guy remembered how the saleswoman gave him all this goodness, thinking that he was giving his mother a gift and making a discount for being a good son. The guy painted his lips bright red and began to look at himself in the mirror. He thought that something was wrong and decided to blame it on the mirror, which was cheap. Then it came to the hairstyle. The guy let his hair down and wanted to leave it just down, because he was pretending to be an unmarried woman. However, he decided to make an effort and make everything beautiful. Then he took a comb and began to comb his hair, forming a hairstyle. Unexpectedly for our hero, an angry old man bursts into the room and says that the guy is too naive, thinking that the teacher is sleeping. When the guy turned to face him, out of surprise and shock, the old man dropped his smoking pipe on the floor and began shouting at his student that he had been acting too strangely since the evening. Ryu Yang had already braided his hair, put on a dress, powdered his face, and put on lipstick, but he didn't look much like a girl, more like a clown than a girl. The old man, in a rage, began to shout at the boy, saying that this look was as indecent as possible, and even ghosts looked more decent than him. The old man also realized that the boy wanted to get a job in a glass shop to deceive everyone and easily earn money by moving only his fingers. The sad student turned his head to floor and said that he understood and regretted his action, promising that he would not do it again. Unable to calm down, the old man continued to shout at the young man, saying that he had gone too far, adding that he had not taught him this and was proud of the fact that he pretended to be asleep, and then went into the guy's room. Our hero was ashamed, and at the same time he was dissatisfied with the fact that the old man was pretending to be asleep, because it was vile, and now Sabu would tease him with this for another 100 years, especially since he caught him red-handed, and now he definitely wouldn't get away with it. The old man shouted at the young man that the guy would have been detected and would only have been disgraced, and if he was going to do something, then let him do it more believably. And in general, since when, as soon as something doesn't work out, does he immediately give up? Is that what Sabu taught his student? The teacher yelled at the student and said that in order to become a woman, you must forget that you are a man, and think like a woman. You must become a woman so that no one would suspect you. The master also added that that is why he tells his young student to study and study, and also asked what this fool would do without him. The surprised boy did not understand anything and asked to repeat it. With great grandeur, the master stood up and began to talk about how, starting tomorrow after work, they would make a girl out of him, and then added that he would make Ryu out of him. Yona is the ideal woman, but before that, even if she doesn't dream of working in a drink shop. The frightened guy thought that he would have to lose something important, and therefore, asking what all this meant, he said that he would no longer do this. He had goosebumps. He explained that today's masquerade was a consequence of overwork, so he asked to forget everything the master saw. Covering the student's mouth with his palm, the old man said with a malicious smile that the student began at his own request, but could not finish at his own request. The next morning, the master prepared women's clothing for our young hero. He said that here is everything that girls wear when going out on top of all their clothes. The teacher began to talk about how there were all the clothes from underwear to outerwear, and they were laid out in the corner of the room. The teacher pointed to the things with his hand. The teacher also added that from today after work, Ryu Young will have to dress up and wear it. The old man will teach him how to behave. The angry and embarrassed guy asked if the old man was serious, and added that he would rather work in the forge day and night instead. The old man, with a serious expression on his face, said that he would not let his student give up so easily, especially since he added that regardless of whether he could get a job in a drink shop, this would be good training, to which the boy replied in an even more ferocious voice that he did not want that to happen. He was forced to do strange things every day, calling it training. The master hit the guy on the top of the head and forced him to look at the floor, calling the boy a daring pest. He asked why, according to him, this could not be training. He added that half of the inhabitants on Earth are women, and the size of the population on our Earth greatly depends on them. And he also asked why the young man should not try to become one of them. He continued his story by saying that with the help of this experiment, he would be able to look at the world from a different point of view and learn a lot of new things, to which he would hear an answer from a dissatisfied guy, that he believes that he cannot turn into a woman. Making an even more menacing and serious appearance, Sabu shouted that it was necessary to make the impossible possible. He said he could Ryu-yang will not become a woman, but you need to at least try. Try to get closer to the ideal. So stop chatting about it and ordered you to quickly put on the clothes that he prepared. Otherwise the master will be very disappointed in him and will not be able to control himself. Our hero had no choice, so he sadly took the clothes and wanted to put them on, as the old man added that when the boy dances, let him not think of taking off his clothes. After hearing the words about undressing, the frightened boy suspected that Sabu wanted to take him to some vulgar establishment and refused to dance. To which the teacher, looking into the student's eyes, thought that he had already guessed everything. The teacher drew attention to the guy's bracelets, which he gives him every year for his birthday. The guy called these bracelets pieces of iron, which become heavier and heavier every year. Once again, the mentor closed his eyes and called his student a talker. He said that in order to develop the flexibility and elegance of the guy, he allows the dance to be based on phoenix techniques, and therefore let him try to look beautiful with these bracelets. But if the boy relies only on martial art, then will receive from the teacher. The guy asked the teacher why he was making him dance, to which the teacher answered briefly and directly, saying that he just wanted it that way and that's all. The old man added that if he didn't like it, he could try to run away from his blows and threw the student a bunch of ringing bells and told him to hang them on his bracelets. The bells in his hands, the guy asked what he wanted them for, to which he received a rude answer from the teacher that everything was obvious and simple. The guy must achieve such mastery, so that they don't ring when he dances and the teacher allows the guy to shake them once during the performance. Sitting with the teacher, the guy did not understand anything. He said that the bells themselves were constantly ringing and asked why the teacher was torturing him so much. The old man said with a smile that when young Ryu-yang will grow up, he himself will go to Sabu's great thoughts, and also gave tasks so that the guy, when returning home from the forge, would try to imitate women and think about giving the guy a new name, once he becomes a girl. The guy with loud screams began to shout at the laughing old man, saying that he was not a girl, but would simply wear women's clothes. But the old man got so played that he came up with a new name for our hero, and said that he would call him Young B, explaining that from his full name after B Ryu-yang, he removed Ryu and turned it over, so it turned out to be Young B. The guy was very embarrassed, his face was as red as a tomato, and the coach continued that Yang means beauty, and it sounds beautiful. And since everything fits perfectly, he made the boy change clothes and gave him 15 minutes. More than 15 minutes passed. The master, out of indignation, called the student slow as a wasp and wondered what he was doing there, after which Sabu shouted that Yang Ryu immediately left. Yang Ryu was so embarrassed and ashamed that he was simply embarrassed or afraid to come out from behind the curtain, and therefore, without even looking out of it, he said that he had changed his clothes. The old man looked at the young man with great surprise. Nothing could be read on his face except such great surprise, which turned into shock. But what did he see there? Our young Yang Ryu really looked like the lovely Young B. This guy is a genius. He put everything on himself so well that he really couldn't be distinguished from the girl. Sabu immediately realized that the student understood this and knew what to attach where, but did not understand how to attach it. Getting up and starting to beat his student, the old man said that since he dressed like a noble lady, he should behave accordingly, and asked if he was familiar with the concept of elegance. The teacher continued that the hair should be carefully gathered behind the ears, and the knees should be slightly bent. But the angry young Ryu replied that where has this been seen, and it looks more like femininity than elegance. But the teacher replied that first of all, if you move so carefully that there is not even the sound of bells, although it is feminine, it is suspicious. Thoughtful, the old man nevertheless agreed with the guy for the first time. He said that perhaps young Ryu is right, and wondered if this is not the main torment of women, or perhaps it's just a prejudice. And yet the master got angry from his own stream of thoughts. Sabu said that no matter what they were thinking, right or wrong now, in the midst of these prejudices a woman was born. The master said that young Ryu immersed himself in his role, accepted more and more feminine essence, and became a real maiden of this era. Although even after transforming, the guy did not accept his new essence. Stretching out his hand with the book, the master handed the student a book with a pink cover, He said that this book is all about hairstyles and makeup, and also that the guy needs to study this book carefully. The teacher, having handed over the book, began to joke with the student. They say that it makes no difference whether the student has a hairstyle or without. And Sokai's student just asked if it was necessary to go so far in these feminine things. Grabbing the student by the shoulder and sighing deeply, the old man said that this guy was nothing but torture, and also told him to forget about his past as a man. The master continued his story and said that the guy should say that he is, without a doubt, a feminine and elegant girl, and make his speech and voice more gentle. Sabu gave the guy the task, so that from that moment on, having studied everything well, he would show a real lady. Sabu and Belankaya were walking through the forest when suddenly the old man stopped abruptly, and Belankaya stopped in shock and opened her spacious mouth. Sabu said that autumn is indeed the time of harvest and admired the beautiful views of the autumn forest. Seeing a little tiger cub eating some fruits, he was surprised that he was already more than 2 months old. Sabu did not notice how quickly time had passed and said that he needed to harvest from the other side. Night. The entire clear sky was strewn, as if crushed by thousands of stars, and next to them shone a huge and bright moon. This is a great place to relax. Looking at the moon, it is impossible to do anything. Your eyes peer and you freeze as if under hypnosis. At night, the village changed greatly. The huge, beautiful building looks a bit boring during the day, but at night, under the light of the red lanterns and the moonlight, it looks especially beautiful. As always, there were a lot of visitors in the drink room. From the inside, it looked even more beautiful than from the outside. Huge red carpets and large lamps that hung above almost every table. At about 9 or 11 at night, sitting inside was a mysterious but handsome young man dressed in a purple kimono with a large ponytail behind his back. The young man offered a drink to the guy who was walking next to him. Apparently it was his student, or a guard, because the guy called himself pathetic for drinking with a beautiful young man, calling him a teacher. The guy sat down and said that after 4 months of such a long journey, he believed that they became pretty good friends. Smiling, this young teacher decided to embarrass his subordinate a little, to which he began to stammer and say that he did not mean it that way. Having offered his deepest apologies, the guy said that, if this was an order, he would immediately take the cup. The teacher remained silent. After a short pause, the teacher tried to calm the student down and said that on such a beautiful autumn night, it's impossible not to miss a glass of room. Chun, and he looked so thoughtful he apologized for his thoughtfulness, and said that the guy would forget. Screams began to be heard from the entrance. Apparently the merchant was shouting at someone that this time, even though it was a girl, he still wouldn't let him through, and also asked if she was really 11 years old. This time it was Sabu again with his student, who was dressed as a girl. The merchant apologized, but said that sending a child of 11 or 12 years old to the stage in a tavern was too much. Then the master teased the merchant, saying that he lives only by deception. The teacher with a long tail, who was sitting in the tavern and listening to this entire conversation, the young man became quite angry while listening to all this, and an ominous aura began to form around him. From the street you could hear Sabu trying to beg him to take young Ryu is in the girl's abundance, explaining that she must entertain the eyes and ears of visitors. Hitting the table with his bowl, the even more angry teacher said that she was so young and was already being sold to the tavern. He was clearly unhappy with this. Having said that it was difficult to forgive, the captain got up from the table and perhaps wanted to take some measures, but his subordinate wanted to stop him, saying that he would reconsider the decision and add that there were too many eyes in this matter. The captain was seriously angry. The young man with him said that all the surrounding areas were within reach, and as long as the captain wanted, he could follow the old man. Having thought everything over thoroughly, the captain calmed down and sighed heavily. He told his subordinate to leave such thoughts aside. When the captain left the table and was heading towards the exit, the young man asked him if he was leaving, to which he received the answer that if you cannot erase memories, then leaving this place is also a good option, also adding that the excitement subsides, and the remaining alcohol seems to evaporate. Pointing out the merchant's stupidity, Sabu said that he had come to them with gold, and that they would immediately prepare a scene. Sighing heavily, the merchant said that he would do just that now and asked to wait, but in his head he thought that he would never forget this old man. Leaving the establishment, the captain, walking with his henchmen, handed the waiter a bag of money. Most likely there was more than he had to pay, but he was noble, so he did not skimp on tips. Dissatisfied, young Ryu and the old man locked eyes. The rude and dissatisfied guy asked why Sabu was staring, because he heard him with his words, and now he was shaking his nerves, to which the old man replied that he just missed a couple of jokes. Looking at the old man's back, young Ryu asked what was going on there, to which Sabu said not to pay attention to useless things, and it would be better for the guy to prepare without extraneous thoughts. When our young hero entered the stage, and he was in the form of a girl, so we can safely call her a heroine. When young Bai entered the stage, everyone was in complete shock, because she was an 11-year-old girl, and the instrument she played was more than herself. A beautiful girl who played an instrument that was larger than her on the stage. Her playing was so beautiful and incredible that everyone around froze and listened silently, but some suggested that it could be the daughter of the tavern owner, and people were haunted by her bells. Oh God, how beautifully she played. Everyone was delighted. Questions ran between people about how such a sound could really pour out of these young hands. The tired and sad girl considered her grandfather as a ghost, although young Ryu became a girl, but this job in the tavern really transformed his life. If you remember the past of this young bee, you can remember how she once chopped wood as a guy. The master forced poor young bee to yearn for buckets of water so that she would have correct posture and a slim waist. Young bee herself called this severe bullying. Having hit his student with a smoking pipe, he called him a dork and told him to speak more softly, to which young Bai replied that there are no masters who slap an innocent girl upside the head. But Sabu got out of it by saying that separating students by gender is direct discrimination, and this is actually an insult, and added that he is not the kind of master who would do that. The girl continued to play beautiful melodies, completely immersed in her thoughts and feelings. She believed that if she tried today, then this image would be over. Young Bee was very glad that so far everything was going without errors, but her gaze became a little clouded, and she remembered the words that you can fail if you do everything only according to orders. All the people in the tavern admired the young maiden who played so beautifully. They were both old and young. Everyone watched the beauty without stopping, and did not take their eyes off her. And young Bee herself did not understand how people could be intoxicated by music. A merchant entered the main hall and told everyone to drink, dance, and enjoy this charming music. Hansen was also fascinated by the young lady's music, and she was flattered that even he was happy with everything. Young Bee hoped that he would remember her performance for a long time. If you turn on your imagination when looking at this girl and listen to her melodies, you could imagine that she, like a princess of the field with a bunch of butterflies, sits in a meadow and plays melodies for the plants. Changing the rhythm, the girl said that the time had come for everyone to wake up, and this cheerful and loud melody began to float throughout the village from that same glass shop. Han-san said that the child has a chance of success and suggested that they first conclude an agreement, and suggested starting with 5 silver coins a day. The master said that the man calls himself an honest businessman, but at the same time he is too cunning. Sabu also added that he still remembers the reaction of the audience to Young Bee's performance. Young Bee remembered how everyone listened to her melodies in admiration and clapped, and she herself was even embarrassed, because she played without really trying. The old man invited Han-san to reveal some secret. The surprised man asked what Sabu was talking about. Bringing his face closer, the master began to tell that when he met this child, he gave her the name Young Bee, where Young meant swallow and bee flight, that is, extraordinary beauty flying in the sky. The merchant did not understand why this should surprise him. The angry old man asked if the man understood the meaning of this expression, shouting and saying that if talent lay only in playing an instrument, he would name her after the lark. He also calmed down and added that Young Bai is named after a beautifully flying swallow, and this is due to the fact that this child can dance. Imagining Young Bee in a luxurious dress while dancing, the old man said that she dances incredibly mesmerizingly, so much so that Han-san would immediately forget even that playing the instrument. The man said that in this case they should have shown dancing first, not singing, and that this was the first time he had heard such praise from Sabu. The old man himself said that there was no point in wasting energy on showing it for free. The serious old man said that if Han-san insists, they can show the dance, but then he and Young Bee will be very tired, and they will have to raise the terms of the contract 3 times, to which the surprised merchant said that this is too much. Sabu said that given the merchant's position, this is the best plan, and he will thank him later. Our hero did not understand what plan he was talking about. The old man hit the table and said that they should just trust him and increase the fee only twice. And when Han-san sees her dance, and if he thinks that it is not worth the money, then Sabu will return it. Then the smiling Sabu said that since everything was fine, they should sum up their agreement. Raising his finger, the elder summed up the results. The first is 10 silver coins per day, and also the child will perform only on even days of the month, because otherwise the art will not look elegant. Holding up 2 fingers, Sabu said that all tips that guests give from above will be theirs, to which Han-san agreed with a little indignation. And finally, raising 3 fingers, the sage said that this child would dance only when she wanted. Han-san got angry and said that this is simply outrageous. The contract was concluded precisely because the elder emphasized her dancing skills. Sighing, the old man said that on the contrary, this will increase the demand for Han-san's business. People will be delighted with her performance, and will think that if her singing is so beautiful, then so will her dancing. The old man also added that he hoped that Han-san had outstanding management skills, but it turns out they are so-so because he does not understand that they will come to him more often. Han-san agreed with Sabu. The merchant also added that Sabu once received the nickname Mountain of Gold, and he cannot compare with him, and also thanked him for the teachings. Meanwhile, the student asked the master if everything was exactly right. The old man, standing on some stones, said that this was the shortest road home, and since his student became a girl, so that he would not be pestered, he should walk along this road. Angry young Ryu shouted that he was not a girl, and the old man had no idea how difficult it was to walk along such a road in a skirt. But the old man replied that he was not a woman, and did not know. The master and student stood in front of a huge stone. Our hero said that Sabu wants him to become a girl, but climbing up in such clothes is already too much and he cannot go anywhere. The old man said that there is even a woman who walks along this road with ease after giving birth. The fierce boy shouted and asked who she was. Sabu said that this was their tigress White. The old man added that from now on, 7 times every 2 weeks the student will have to walk along this road, so he should follow the master. Jumping away from the stone in a skirt, our hero regretted that he had listened to his mentor and climbed onto the huge stone. Having climbed up, our hero said that he still had to ask his mentor something. Our hero put his hand to his mouth, cleared his throat, and sighing heavily turned to his mentor. Approaching the house, Sabu was surprised that the road was really very short, and asked what the student wanted from him. Pensive young Ryu said that he understands why. Because of the forge, he will perform at the wine glass every 2 days. But our hero did not understand why the master excluded full moons and new moons. Sabu sat down and said that the wooden toy workshop said that they wanted to see the boy once or twice a month because sometimes he creates strange things, to which young Ryu replied dissatisfied. The master also added that next time the guy should take toys with him when he goes to the village and sell them himself, so that our hero understands how the market works, and got angry and said, the fact that he doesn't just want to earn money for a whole month, and also that Sabu forces him to work, but does not teach him martial arts, and our hero is tired of this. The old man watched silently. Pointing his finger at his house, the old man asked whose house it was, to which the guy said that it was definitely Sabu's house. The old man continued by asking who then picked up that boy who didn't really know how to hunt, clean, or cook, and that he had taken him in for 3 years now, and was teaching him everything. After hesitating, our dissatisfied hero lowered his gaze to the floor and said that the answer was obvious. Raising his hand to the boy, Sabu said that he was very ill-mannered, and at that moment some strange sound sounded. The guy flew away screaming. The master gave him a strong slap, and the boy thought that now Sabu was hitting without even putting his hand to it. And the last question Sabu asked which of them was younger, to which after a short pause young Ryu said he did. Then Sabu stood up and shouted at the student that he had brought young Ryu came to him, gave him a house and taught him, and therefore the boy must work and earn money. Our hero fell to the ground, and the teacher continued to grumble about how ungrateful modern youth are, and how hard he worked when he was young. The guy felt that he was right, but could not answer. Turning away, the old man told the boy not to complain like that again, and he would monitor his behavior. Our hero said that this is the bitterness and resentment of a brilliant boy who has nothing. Thinking sharply, the dumbfounded guy realized that if it's about money, you can earn it. If it's about strength, you need to train. Hitting the ground with his fist, our hero decided that he would train as he is now, and begin to save money without Sabu noticing, because anyway, he would not go anywhere, and Sabu would continue. The boy began to dream that when he got rich, Sabu would crawl to him and beg him to live with him on his knees. The guy's eyes lit up. He said that soon the brilliant boy would become a brilliant rich man, owning many buildings. Our hero worked tirelessly. He forged swords in a forge for which he was well paid. I sat on the street, made wooden figurines and sold them for good money. Some man at the entrance to the glass shop was enticing all sorts of visitors to come inside. At the entrance, some visitors said that they would only come in when they saw young Bai, and hoped that they could see her dance, because there was a whole 3-day weekend ahead due to the new moon. Visitors asked the man at the entrance whether there would be a dance, to which he said that he did not know this in advance. Suddenly, the second visitor saw the girl. It was young Bee walking. Behind her back, she was holding an instrument that was wrapped in something, and everyone around her admired her beauty and offered to drink with them. Young Bai found it all disgusting, how old people beg to look at them and cry because she ignores. After the girl entered, a huge crowd of people began to crowd and try to enter the drink shop as quickly as possible. The men at the entrance asked not to crowd and enter one at a time. Hearing the clatter of horses, the men who were trying to calm the crowd looked back and saw something. It was a luxurious carriage that arrived, surrounded by a bunch of guards, and the carriage itself was traveling as if in a convoy. It was Chan Hyung-gru, in order to prevent information leakage, when a room was booked for him. No one was told who he was, and therefore no one met him. The man offered to come in. Holding some girl in his arms, Chon Hyangru said that they would stay here for now. And turning to the girl as Ye Rin, he asked if she was tired. The girl addressed the man as her father and said that she was fine. The father suggested that his daughter take a walk and said that it would not bother her at all. Chan's arms Hyangru, and people around said that young B couldn't hold a candle to her. That's why the girl was so small but with such a bewitching look. Under the falling cherry blossom petals, the girl got off her father's arms and stood up. Adjusting her hat, she looked at the wine glass. She had a beautiful, gentle face. Her dark blue eyes were like a lake, such a deep and bewitching look. The girl was wearing a light pink dress and a large hat. The guards around her parted to allow the girl passage. The embarrassed guys from the security put their fist on their chest and bowed to the girl. The guys who were standing at the entrance to the drink shop were also very embarrassed. One of them said that the girl was so small, and his legs were already giving way. Everyone was staring at the girl. The young lady reached out with her hand to straighten her hair and lifted her veil a little. At that moment, the father sharply pressed his daughter to himself and turned her face away from the staring men. With a sharp wave of his hand, one of the people in the guard abruptly pulled out a katana. The guy put a sword to the throat of one of those who stood at the entrance to the drink shop and said that the girl was not from their social circle, and if the guy saw their sly eyes again, they would not expect mercy. The men at the entrance immediately began to bow and apologize, and the young man from the guard himself put his sword back in its sheath. One of the respected workers of the glass shop came out and told those two to call the owner, saying that important guests had arrived. Sam Chon Hyangru stood hugging his daughter and looked with an angry gaze. The respected employee sighed heavily and apologized to Chon Hyangru. He said that he would report to the owner so that he would punish those two. Then he invited the father and daughter to go further, to which he angrily agreed, and they went together. Late evening. Cheerful shouts could be heard from the glass shop. Everyone was laughing, drinking, and dancing. Everything glowed with bright colors, and everyone rested as best they could. Young Bai stood in a beautiful red and black dress and bowed to the audience. Everyone clapped and shouted, "Wow!" One of the visitors smiled in admiration. He said that he had finally seen Young Bi's dance and could die in peace, to which the second said that it was too early for him to die. One of the men, in fear and surprise, began pointing his finger behind his friend's back and saying that there was a corpse lying there. His friend laughed and pointed to the guy who was lying unconscious on the table. The man said that this was a side effect of Young Bi's new dance, and he behaved the same way. Everyone around them was either unconscious or very embarrassed. Workers came up to them and asked if everything was okay with the people. Some man was embarrassed and raised his hand. He and other people decided whoever makes the biggest donation collects money from everyone else and goes to Young Bai. The others also raised their hands and made donations, but the first man paid as many as 8 silver coins, and the man also added that Young Bi refuses large sums or gifts. The joyful man raised a sign with the inscription 10 silver coins, saying that he has neither family nor parents, and therefore he does not need money and will give it to Young Bai. The man brought a bag of coins into Young Bi's hands, and she addressed him as Mr. Joe. The girl said that she would gratefully accept this gift from the man. The guy clearly could barely stand on his feet after the conversation with Young Bi. He was shocked that she remembered his last name. Our hero was counting the coins. There were 43 coins. He wanted to tell the old man that he had earned 21. Han San approached the girl and invited the girl to perform additionally in front of special guests. The man offered the fee twice as much and the guards would take her home. The girl thought about it and began to increase her worth. She offered a triple fee. Han San said that she looked like an elder and agreed. The man said that there were high society people sitting in the ballroom and asked Young Bi to perform well. The girl thought about it, and with a sparkle in her eyes said that she would try, and also thought that only rich people were sitting there. A huge hall. Few people, 3 men were sitting at a huge table and security stood nearby. The table with the men was as close as possible to the stage. Young Bi came out and started playing. The girl began to play and sing a song. The song said that someone waved a sword and cut the spring wind, and leaves fell onto a snowy clearing. Young Bi's beautiful singing. She sang that when it was figured out who was right and who was wrong, only the cold moon was looking from the sky. Everyone was immersed in her beautiful singing, and they sang about the respected one who had been looking for his sword for 30 years. How many times the leaves fell and new shoots bloomed. Even Chan himself, Hyaran, enjoyed the excellent playing and singing of our Young Bi. And the lines in the song were about someone beating a drum and asking to look at him, for whom the plants bloom in the spring. The girl finished playing and the last note was like a drop of water that fell into the ocean. Silence reigned. Each of the men silently began to look at Young Bi, who had finished playing. The worried Young Bai wondered why they were so silent. She began to think that they didn't like something. Chan Hyaran smiled. He was in a very good mood from the song Young Bi was playing. He said that it was great music and happily hit the table. Each of the men praised Young Bi's song. The man said that for decades he had not heard anything better, and the notes of the young girl tormented his soul. Continuing to praise, the men asked what the name of the beautiful girl was. She introduced herself and said that these people's words were too generous, and she was just starting to play. Joyful Chan Hyaran said that young B has a very beautiful voice. She doesn't speak, but sings, and if she believes that she has room to grow, and therefore the songs will be even more beautiful. The man also added that even now young B has reached a good level and her name suits her. Another man said that the girl was good, but she was no match for Chan's daughter in terms of beauty and beauty. Hyarunu. Chan Hyarun got angry and said that young B's beauty already intoxicates many men at such a young age. It is difficult to imagine what kind of woman she will grow up to be. After these words, the man who started the conversation about young B's appearance immediately began to apologize and say that he didn't mean anything like that. Chan Hyarun again added that although the girl is so young, she is a very amazing performer. The man said that young B probably had a strict teacher, and also praised her again, and asked his brother for his opinion. The brother stood up enthusiastically and shouted that he didn't know because unlike her, he didn't have a hand, and therefore he couldn't understand. Chan Hyarun screamed and addressed his drunken brother as Il Cheon. Chan Hyarun turned to Mr. Namgung and said that Il Cheon had apparently had too much, and therefore asked the man to take him to his room. Mr. Namgung obeyed. Mr. Namgung extended his hand to brother Jong Harnwa, however. He pushed him away and told him not to touch him. Night. Huge rocks. At the foot of the rocks you can hear some conversation between people. It was a group of people on horses with hats that covered their faces. One of the people said that they should stop here, and so as not to be heard, they should continue on foot. A young guy appeared behind the hat and said that when they reached Mount Hyan, they were rushing him. He thought that they were returning home, but it turned out that they were not. The guy asked to tell me more about the order that the pigeon conveyed. He was told that the dove conveyed the order of the master. Looking at the village from the mountain, the man said that the young man, that is, the Royal Highness the Prince, was ordered that night to wipe out this village from the face of the earth. Everything. The surprised young man looked at the narrator and listened that the prince must kill everyone, people, buildings, and even the last pets, and then check everything and return. Chan answered rudely Hyaran to Mr. Namgun. The entire hall watched this spectacle, including the visitors, young B and Chan himself. Hyaruna. Young B reached for her hairpin with the thought that she did not take a sword to the stage and wanted to use the hairpin. But then she realized that there were guards there and it would be better if she ate dates. The drunk man said that he just shouted out one phrase, and his brother was already calling him a drunkard, adding that apparently with such an ugly brother as him, Chan Hyarun doesn't want to talk. The man also added that it would be better if his brother cut off his tongue instead of his hand. Chan Hernu got seriously angry and said that apparently Il Cheon had accumulated a lot. Il Cheon calmed down and said that he was just joking, and his brother immediately became so serious. The man added that he would remain silent. Cheon also turned to the man who wanted to take him to bed. He hoped that he would not be offended for shouting and asked to remember his name. The man said his name was Namgung Jin. Young B began to analyze what she heard and came to the conclusion that the drunkard's hand was cut off by his own brother. Shouts could be heard from the audience that Namgung Jin was more talented than his brother. Namgung Jin replied that he could not compare with his brother, to which Il Cheon said that apparently the guy was saying that because his brother was with them. Namgung Jin's brother asked what the drunk man was saying and asked if there were any complaints against him, to which Il Cheon did not even notice his brother and laughed at that. Il Cheon whispered to Namgung Jin that he feels that the guy is also having a hard time because of his hot brother, and also added that people born first get a lot for nothing and do not understand them. After the words were spoken, Il Cheon turned around and smilingly said that he was clearly right and headed towards the exit of the hall. Chan remained sitting at the table Hyarun. He had a strange empty look. Il Cheon asked Mr. Namgung to take care of his brother. Namgung Jin said that unlike a disabled person like him, his brother is the firstborn in the family and the hope of their clan. Il Cheon reached for a jug of drink, and Namgung Jin said that of course, if he had to, he would give his life for his brother. Approaching the exit, the drunk man laughed and said that these were wonderful words, and also wished success to Mr. Namgung. He also added that, at the behest and desire of his brother, he was leaving the hall. Meanwhile, on the street, near the village where the prince and his squad were, 2 swords were stuck into the ground. The guy stood in front of the swords and did not understand anything. He was told that, as ordered by the overlord, the detachment would not interfere, and was told that the swords were the prince's weapons. The prince repeated his task out loud, saying that he was ordered to go to the village alone and carry out a massacre there. Looking at the servants, the guy asked what they were ordered to do then, to which he received the answer that they were ordered not to let anyone out of the village until the prince finished his work. The young man with a heavy, empty look looked at the boys from the servants, and asked what would happen if he did not go to the village. The guy continued to ask what would happen if he refused to carry out such an order. One of the swordsmen reached for his sword. Drawing her katanas, the servant said that until the prince carried out the order, the guy would also not be able to leave the borders of this village. The swordsman standing opposite said that the prince had no choice, and everyone took up their swords. The smart prince guessed that their real mission was if he did not obey the order of his master. Making a more serious and intense look, the guy finished that they must eliminate or kill him by any means. The swordsmen tensed and took out their swords. They prepared to fight the prince. The young man also took out one of the swords stuck in the ground and prepared for something. Testing how sharp the sword was with his finger, the young man asked to tell him who the owner of the village was, and how many people he had to kill. The swordsmen calmed down. One of them said that the settlement belongs to Namjok-bu, and as they know, it is home to approximately 37 people. The guy waved his sword through the air and thought very hard about something. He stood and was silent for several minutes, after which the prince said that in order to fight with the likes of Namjok-bu, he needs to decide one thing, and he will need the help of a servant. The swordsman bowed down and said that he was listening to the prince. He added that they were ready to do anything to carry out the order. With a hard look, the prince said that he had never killed anyone before, and therefore he might be left with psychological trauma if he killed someone like that for the first time in his life. The guy added that he needed to try it. For the sake of experiment, the swordsman became very worried. Pointing the sword at the servant, the young man asked how many of the swordsmen he could test. Meanwhile, in the drink shop, the same atmosphere, the same people, not counting the departed Il-cheon. Namgung Jin's older brother asked the girl's name and said that he had heard about her, and he was also struck by the composure of our young Bai. The girl thanked him for his generous words. The man continued that he had heard that young B from Chungyang-ru, in addition to singing, has another extraordinary talent, and also asked what it was, because rumors are always inflated. Chon Hyarun asked young B to show this talent. The second man added that they say that seeing a swallow from Chunhyangru fly over the guests is more difficult than seeing an angel dance. The girl said that fortunately these were just rumors, and, on the contrary, she was afraid so as not to ruin a good evening. The man said he thought so, but they say the customers can't wait for it. Raising his glass, cheerful Chunhyangru said that if everything is already so serious, then he would really like to see this dance. The second man supported Chunhyangru. The man said that if young B's dance, as everyone says, is so amazing, and she can revive their fallen mood, then he will thank the girl well, and she thought about how much she will be paid. The man raised his 2 hands, showing 10 fingers, which meant that he would pay 10 gold coins and asked not to torment them. After clapping her hands, the girl said that if so, then she agreed and smiled. After the claps, the musicians entered the hall, who did not understand why they were being called. In a tired voice, they hoped that young Bai would pay them. The girl said that, as they say, good sake is made from good water and dance is made from music. Showing 3 fingers, young B asked to play well and promised to pay 3 coins. The musicians were delighted that they would be paid 3 gold coins, and also added that they had not played Kimsibi Solya for a long time. The old people decided to shake off the old days. A girl standing on stage asked to leave to prepare for the performance. The man thought about the song. Golden wings covered the snowy night. They were wondering what kind of dance the girl would show to this music. Having climbed up, young B began to lower the fabric down, and the men were surprised that the performance itself was different from other dancers, and they would not be forced to wait long. The music started playing, and our beautiful young Bai began to dance her beautiful dance. Beautiful fabric long parts from the dress with bells were flying all over the hall. The musicians showed excellent performance. They were masters of their craft. The whole hall was in shock. It was very beautiful. Chan himself. Hernu was glued and couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful dance and the beautiful girl. Our young Bai twirled in an incredible dance, captivating the audience from the hall. She smiled and really looked like a bird flying over the guests. The girl landed from the 2nd floor down to the stage and bowed. The musicians showed excellent performances and were completely focused on playing as best as possible. The girl continued to dance. The whole spectacle was incredible, as if she was dancing a couple dance alone. And here apparently was the final part of the dance. Young Bai let go of the long pieces of fabric and stopped. Meanwhile, a battle broke out between the subordinates and the prince. The young man attacked, and the swordsman tried his best to defend himself. The guy was serious. He furiously hit his opponent's sword so hard that there were sparks. Once again, the guy hit with all his strength as seriously as possible, and this time he hit the weak point of the enemy's sword, and therefore it began to crack and break. As a result, the prince was able to cut the sword of one of the warriors who fought with him. The guy began to try to attack the man, but he dodged very well. It was noticeable that the prince was an experienced fighter. However, the prince was not weak, and therefore continued to fiercely attack his subordinate. It was simply impossible to fight with the stump of a sword. Once again, fighting off the prince's blade, the man this time did not notice how he opened himself. At this moment, the prince inserts the sword into his opponent's body with all his fury and has no regret. The guy pulled out his sword and began to evade the warriors who attacked him to avenge his ally. The young man was really good. He dodged literally every attack of his enemies. And then he fiercely counterattacked, not giving his opponent time to make a short pause. Once again, during the enemy's attack, the guy jumped into the sky and deflected the enemy's sword with his sword. While in the air, the prince aimed his blade directly at the enemy's chest and was about to strike. The guy distracted the enemy, and then jumped straight onto the enemy's blade and ran along it. The warrior did not understand what was happening. Everything was as if in a fog. The prince appeared and disappeared. And then suddenly a blow of enormous force from the young man. The blow was so strong and spectacular that it was impossible to see where exactly the prince was attacking. All that could be seen was the blood that spread throughout the clearing where the battle took place. The young man returned to his boomerang, which he used to distract the attention of his opponents. Being as gloomy as possible, the prince caught his thing and stood silently looking at his opponents. With a slight wave of his hand, the guy hid his boomerang in his sleeve and continued to say nothing. The soldiers laid down their arms, hoping that the training was over. They said that they were afraid that the prince would waste his strength, and therefore, they were gladly ready to sacrifice their heads. If the prince did not have enough blood, they all bowed and were ready to decorate the road for Changwon with their heads. The evil guy watched the squad, who bowed their heads in front of him, and said that such care brought tears to his eyes. The young man laid his eyes on the place where the battle had just taken place. There were about 4 corpses of the prince's subordinates lying on the battlefield. Taking his sword in his hands, the prince began to move towards the very corpses he had just mutilated. Raising his hat with a blade, the guy asked the others who the murdered man was. One of the subordinates bowed and said that this man's name was Ju Ryan. The guy thought about it, repeating the name of the killed warrior. The soldiers said that they would take care of the corpse themselves and asked the young man not to try to remember it just because it was the prince's first corpse. The guy looked angrily at his subordinate and did nothing. His gaze was like that of an animal. At that time, the beautiful young Bai was dancing in the drink shop, who apparently was in no hurry to finish her dance. The girl walked around the stage on tiptoes, like a speck of dust, and continued to dance. What amazing movements our heroine did. No one looked away, no one even blinked. The men watched the dance and said that these were very beautiful movements. A simple scene turned into a beautiful picture. Chon Hyangru added that this is a golden bird and a dark, snowy one. While the girl was dancing, the man continued to say that this was truly the most beautiful dance. There was a silhouette of a golden bird around the girl. Everyone noticed the mystical and brightly shining eyes of young Bai. She waved her arms as if she was about to take off like a real bird. The old man was not mistaken when he spoke about how well the young girl danced. The crowd rejoiced. These movements enchanted her. No one did anything. Everyone silently looked at the girl with delight. After all this, the girl landed softly and literally imperceptibly and then sat down on the stage. Her hair shone from the glare of the lamps, and the girl herself modestly sat down and sat silently. Everyone was in complete shock. Even those same people from high society began to open their mouths in admiration and surprise. Clapping. One of the men did not know what words could be used to evaluate this magnificent dance, also adding that he had the feeling that he had lived this day only to see this dance. The musicians finished playing, and the girl made a feminine bow and stopped in the center of the stage. Il Cheon stood outside. It was raining. He talked about how everyone was having fun, and he should join in too. Night, it was raining. At the exit from the drink shop, someone came out. The girl opened her umbrella. They asked her from behind if she needed security, and the man also added that it was already late, and it was raining, and she was in trouble. Having put on a raincoat and opened an umbrella, the girl said that she did not need to be accompanied, only asked to take care of her instrument, because due to bad weather she could not take it with her. The girl said that it was just drizzling, and at that moment thunder struck and a terrible downpour began. It started to rain, but Young Bee couldn't afford to have male guards climbing mountains this late at night. Han San stood on the threshold of the drink shop and remembered that the girl was going to the bank, and therefore offered to take her there at least. The guards were confused by Young Bee's beauty and kindness. The girl again asked not to worry about her, and said that she would already go, and then began to turn around. Turning away, Young Bee made a displeased face because her clothes were all wet, and this is the most expensive thing she has. Ryu Young was happy. He smiled and said that he had earned a lot today, and also added that he needed to quickly sell the gold coins so that Sabu wouldn't smell them. Our hero stood in front of a huge building. It was a bank. Completely convinced that this was where he needed it, he headed towards the entrance. Going inside, one of the workers took an umbrella, and Ryu himself, Young, wiped his face with a handkerchief and thought about how to quickly sell the gold coins. There was a smiling man behind the counter who said that their Cheongryong Bank is happy to welcome you at any time, and also added that he was waiting for our hero. Ryu Young took out a chest of coins and said that today he wants to top up his account with these silver coins, and also change this into cash. This is the very thing the young man was talking about. It was gold. Pure gold of the highest quality. The servant of one of the men who watched young B's dance appreciated her dance at 10 golden flowers. He prepared these flowers for other needs, but gave them to the girl. The girl bowed and said that she was grateful to the man's generous soul, and he laughed and asked to dance for free next time if necessary. The girl said that the man promised to thank her well, but now on the contrary, he is asking for a favor, but she will still try to fulfill his request if possible. Having stopped thinking about how he got the flowers, the guy stood behind the counter and counted how much money he could get for the gold in the accounts. Having counted them to the end, Ryu Young showed the amount to the banker and said that he thought he could earn that much. The man was surprised that at such a young age, the guy knew the value of gold. The guy remembered how he read books like 30 Secrets That You Won't Learn in War, 300 Types of Precious Metals and Stones. You too will become a rich man, and realized that they helped him, writing everything down in a notebook. The man said that when he looks at young B, he remembers a young man her age who has a keen eye for successful investments. The man said that this guy was incredibly rich, but wore ordinary clothes and had long hair, and also offered to organize a meeting for them. Young Bai said that if she wants, she will say it. Young B headed towards the exit. The banker and his assistant bowed, and the man said that Young B's wealth is their joy. The girl said that she would come in one of these days. The guy jumped on the rocks and talked about the fact that when they would start talking well about him, and added that if he hadn't run to dinner now, they would definitely have really praised him. Covering the umbrella, our hero said that we need to hurry. Otherwise, even an umbrella does not help in such weather, because it is not rain, but a flood. The weather outside was terrible. Night. Terrible rain and lightning constantly flashed. It was some kind of house. The windows were open, and a man was lying on the floor by the window. Lightning struck, and his face became visible. This was the same man who gave 10 golden flowers to our young Bai. He was dead, there was blood on the floor, and a sword lay next to him. Apparently the blow hit him almost centrally in the chest. His face was very strange. It felt like he had seen something terrible before his death. Meanwhile, Il Cheon was walking out of the building, his clothes covered in blood and a small trail of blood following him. Cheon's face was visible, he laughed evilly, and his whole hand was covered in blood. Another house, there was a massacre. Someone was screaming in pain, and someone was already dead. The prince's face, clothes, and sword were completely covered in blood, and he had a cold-blooded look. The bloody bodies of the villagers lay on the floor, and a young man with a sword stood nearby. The guy looked like he had plunged into a pool of blood, because there was blood almost everywhere on him. He caught his breath and headed towards the exit of the house. The guy got out and headed to the next house. He didn't care at all. His shoes were covered in blood, and then he left a trail of blood behind him. There was a sound. The prince stopped and looked forward in front of him. 2 of his subordinates stood on the roof of the houses, and below were some of the villagers. With a slight wave of his hand, the guy threw his throwing weapon from under his sleeve. The boomerang flew straight at the girl, who was pinned in a corner. She was holding a knife trying to protect herself, but she could not stop the prince's weapon. The girl was killed. Her corpse quickly fell to the ground, and the young man took his weapon and began to leave. When he had already taken his weapon and was about to leave, he noticed something and stopped. Under the girl's corpse lay a puppy, a small white puppy that did not make any sounds, but its fur was covered in the owner's blood. The guy was very surprised. He opened his mouth either from fear or from surprise. The prince's hand began to tremble. He became very nervous and could not hold the sword normally. Meanwhile, another house and a loud thunderstorm that did not allow anyone to sleep. This was Chon's daughter's room, Hyangru. She frightenedly pressed herself against the wall and looked forward. Opposite her stood a bloodied Il Cheon, who said that he and Rin had not seen each other for a long time. The bird in the cage began to fight and make loud noises, and the girl asked the man not to approach her. Samchon Hyangru was standing on the street, not far from the house. When he heard his daughter screaming, he threw his umbrella and got scared. The man immediately ran like a bullet to his daughter's room because he was very worried. The next day, the forge where Ryu worked from morning to evening Yang. The guy was sitting at the table and wanted to drink water. The blacksmith asked why our hero was holding a huge club at the table and why he bared his chest, because it looked disgusting. Ignoring the guy began to drink water from a huge jug. The blacksmith shouted to him that there was a kettle and a glass nearby, and in general he did not understand what was wrong with Ryu lately. Wiping his face with his hands, our hero said that lately, he had the feeling that if he didn't behave like this, he would lose himself. Maybe it looks rude, but this is how he maintained his ego. 4 days have passed, and now our hero is again in women's clothing, in the guise of young Bai. He thinks that lately he has been living more of the life of young Bai, or he is imagining it. Chan himself addressed the girl Hyangru. He said that it was forbidden to walk here and how she got to this place. Young B said that she came to train, and it seemed like it was always free. The girl was about to leave, saying that she would not bother the men. But Chon Hyung-gru asked the girl to stay and said that everything could be for the better. He asked the girl to play for them. The man asked the girl for help, but Young Bi herself didn't really understand what was happening. Young Bi wondered what she could do to help Chung Hyung-run and began to watch everything more carefully. Meanwhile, Ye-rin was lying in the house with her eyes closed. She was resting, most likely sleeping. The bird was quietly pecking food while sitting in its cage, but something disturbed it. The bird began to chirp loudly and flap its wings, trying to do something. From the loud sounds, Rin began to come to her senses and trembled her hand. The girl opened her eyes. Her whole face was covered in bruises, and Ye-rin herself could barely open her eyes. She simply didn't have enough strength. Fully awake, Rin turned her head to the side and looked towards the cage. She was surprised. In her eyes, everything looked different from what it really was. She saw that it was as if the cage was standing in the fog and the bird was trying to get out. Meanwhile, the bird made sounds louder and louder and really tried to get out of the cage. The girl remembered that terrible night when Il Cheon came to her. She asked him not to approach him, but he approached and said that she really liked the girl, that she was driving him crazy. During this, the bird was hitting the cage and trying to do something, and the man continued to come up saying that sooner or later, someone would get the girl, and therefore he wanted to take her first. Il Cheon was getting closer and closer. He said that he would not give Rin to anyone and would take him into his arms, and the girl herself screamed and called her father for help. The man was upset, saying that even Yurin calls her father, everyone only needs him, but now no one will help her. Il Cheon laughed and said that Daddy has more important things to do. The bird watched. The man continued to pester the girl. He said that the girl excites him, her sweet eyes, tender body and red lips. He wanted to start undressing her. Rin's father ran into the room. He shouted that Il Cheon was an animal, and how dare he do this, he had nothing to say. The girl lay there and didn't understand anything. Everything was like a bad dream that happened in reality. While dragging Il Cheon out of Rin's room, the man apologized to the girl. He apologized for not having time to let her feel what a grown man is. The girl lay as if in mourning, and the man himself continued to shout from afar that someday he would definitely pamper the girl. The girl lay and looked at the bird that was sitting in the cage. She could not do anything. Rin began to get out of bed looking at the cage with the bird that was at the other end of the room. Getting up, the girl fell because she did not have the strength to walk normally after yesterday. The girl sat on the floor and tried to catch her breath so she could continue her journey. Approaching the cage, the girl reached out with her hand to open it. The bird sat quietly. The frightened girl, with a blank look, reached out her hand to the bird and said that it should not look at Rin like that. The girl grabbed the bird with her hand, squeezed it quite tightly. It began to make sounds of pain, and Ye-rin herself told the bird not to look at her with that look. Again, remembering that terrible day, the girl, without understanding it, squeezed the bird's body even more tightly. The bird pecked the girl because Rin squeezed the little bird's body too tightly. Ye-rin screamed in pain, let go of the bird and removed her hand from the cage. The girl, even more frightened, with a dead look, did not understand what she had done. Rin just stood there and looked into the void, as if she was looking at a cage with a bird, but her face looked like she was just looking into nothingness. The girl carefully took the bird in her arms. She was just smiling and chirping. Rin said that the bird shouldn't be with her. After which the girl opened the window in her room and raised her 2 palms to the bright light. The bird sat on the girl's fingers. Rin told the bird to fly, but it did not want to fly away. The girl waved her hand and shouted for the bird to fly away faster. The bird soared into the sky and flew somewhere into the distance, beyond the horizon. Ye-rin to part with her bird, but she understood that it would be better this way, and so she simply looked after her. Looking down into the yard, the girl saw something that interested her very much. It was our beautiful young bee, who danced her equally beautiful dance. Ye-rin was very attracted by such art. The girl looked out of the window and could not take her eyes off this beautiful sight. Young Bee's danced and at the same time climbed her legs onto her window. Young Bai twirled in her dance like a real bird. It was amazing. Having climbed completely, Ye-rin stood on the windowsill with her feet and thought about something, watching our heroine. Even as she was about to jump, Ye-rin couldn't take her eyes off this spectacle, so she stood on the edge of the window and watched. Looking with a tired, empty look, the girl smiled a little and looked down. She already had 1 foot in the abyss. Another moment, and now she would fall. The girl jumped from the window. Her beautiful hair flowed in the wind, and she herself did not think about anything. Young Bee immediately noticed Rin falling and immediately began to think about her plan of action. Shouting out carefully, the girl ran forward to stand under Ye-rin and catch her in her arms. Young Bee jumped into the air and caught the body of Rin, who had already lost consciousness during the flight. Like a feather, our young Bai landed on her toe with the girl in her arms. Young Bee called Rin an eccentric spectator and wondered if she jumped out of the window. Having lowered the girl to the ground, Young Bee shouted that Rin had twisted her leg and also asked the guard if he would go after the people. The guard stood in complete shock from what he saw. Young B caught a man falling from such a height, and not a single scratch. She even reacted faster than the guards, and she was also so cold-blooded. Putting her hand on the girl's leg, Young B shouted that when the guard came back with people, let him wait there until they were called, because Rin would be scared, and Young B needed to heal her leg. The guard shouted to our heroine to leave Rin and not touch her. Young B laughed and remembered how Sabu ran after him to cure the dislocation, because then he could remain lame. Young B told the guard that if you don't hurry, swelling will appear and it will be more difficult to treat. Putting her fingers to her lips, Young B asked to be quiet, and said that the girl was already coming to her senses. She asked the guard to leave the water and leave. The man didn't really understand what was required of him, and therefore fulfilled Young B's request, gave her a vessel with water and left. Lifting Rin's head, Young B asked how Rin was feeling and began checking the girl's temperature. The girl woke up and saw the beautiful Young Bai in front of her. Rin did not understand what was happening, and therefore asked our Young Bai where she was. Young B smiled and said that it seems Rin has come to her senses, and she should have already guessed where she is. Surprised, Ye Rin did not understand where she was and what was happening, and then Young B said that she had gone to heaven. Young B laughed and exhaled. She said that she was just joking and began to hold out a small jug of water to Rin. Lifting the girl higher, our heroine offered the girl water, and then gave Rin some water to drink. Young B suggested that most likely the girl's whole body hurt, and then introduced herself and asked Rin's name. Young B looked at Rin with a kind look and repeated her question. Rin's face had signs of dehydration and abrasions. She also had elegant movements and an expensive robe. Based on this knowledge, Young B assumed that the girl was from a rich family. Young B remembered hearing a conversation between two men. One said that the rumors about the rich girl do not lie, and that she is so beautiful that they always try to kidnap her, and therefore this time was no exception. The rumors spread more and more. The men said that they would also like to take a look at her, and added that she wanted to commit suicide because of the kidnapping attempts. Tired of listening to rumors, Young B was already breaking her comb out of anger, and the men continued saying that all the guards died that night, and after that no one saw her. What happened that night? And then they began to say that they felt sorry for the father of such a girl, but also added that Young B might not refuse, and another said that they should wait another 2 years. The angry girl took aim at the door. She threw 2 small sticks at the thin door and hit the men, who screamed in pain. Having stopped thinking about what happened earlier, Young B held Rin in her arms and thought that she shouldn't trust those men. But she has her own story. The exhausted girl said that her name was Rin. She couldn't even say her name the first time due to lack of strength. 2 beautiful girls were sitting in a green clearing under a tree. Young B smiled and said that she was glad to meet Rin. Her face was very kind. Young Bai asked for what reason. The girl jumped out of the window and asked her to imagine that Rin was confessing to a monk. Ye Rin looked at Young B with an amazing look. Our heroine said that if she doesn't want to tell, then she doesn't have to do it. But then let her nod her head instead of answering questions. Young B made a beautiful smile and said that if Rin told her everything, she would be glad to listen. The girl was shocked. She looked and did not fully understand the reality. Young B asked what prompted the girl to jump out of the window. The girl remembered that terrible night, the moment when her uncle burst into her room. She remembered everything down to the smallest detail, how she was pressed into a corner and Il Cheon pestered her. Tears began to roll down the frightened girl's face. That terrible night clearly affected her mental health. Ye Rin began to cry and began to grab Young B's clothes and hug our heroine. Young B didn't fully understand. Young Bai hugged the girl back and let her cry, but Young B still did not understand what happened that day. Our heroine tried to calm the crying girl, saying that everything would be fine and stroking her head. The bushes began to rustle and conversations began to be heard behind them. One of the men asked if they should intervene. Chon Hyangru said that it's not worth it. He closely watched his daughter with Young B and said that everything would be fine. Rin's father began to roar. He tried to explain to his comrade how long it had been since Rin had cried, because she thought that her tears might worry him or her mother, and therefore did not allow herself to cry. The man said that they first tried to kidnap Ye Rin when she was 3 years old. Then he and his wife thought that she was kidnapped to take revenge on Chung Hyangru. But when she turned 5, then 6, and the older she got, the more she felt perverted looks on her. In this terrible situation, Ye Rin began to think that it was all about her, that she was to blame for all these kidnappings. The man understood that the girl was tormenting her soul and had completely withdrawn into herself. Chon Hyangru continued that even if millions of enemies walk over him, he will not blink an eye. But he is truly afraid of one thing. He is afraid of hundreds of poisonous snakes that are trying to crawl towards his daughter, poisoning and tormenting her fragile soul, and she cannot even cry. Afterwards, they turned their attention to Rin, and the father said that now, his daughter was finally crying. The man watched as Ye Rin and Young B hugged and said that with tears, everything terrible that was lodged in her soul would come out. If she could spit out all this poison, then he would only be happy with her tears. Chon Hyungru stood up and asked the second man to look after the girls. When leaving, he also asked that Young Bai be called to him too. The man said that he would do everything. Meanwhile, Young Bi gave Rin a handkerchief soaked in water and asked her to apply it to her face, and also gave her water so that she would not look like a dried date. Rin calmed down a little and came to her senses. Young Bi smiled and said that she had never met girls who cry for so long. Young Bi jokingly added that she thought she would drown in tears, but the main thing is that everyone is alive. Young Bi whispered in Ye Rin's ear that for dinner today, she had marinated the meat in a delicious sauce, and if she was even 15 minutes late, then a man who looked like a grandfather would eat it all alone. Young Bi's words, and our heroine laughed and said that she couldn't allow this. After a short pause, Rin said that she almost became a monster and sighed heavily. Young Bi was surprised and began to ask if the girl was talking about why she jumped out of the window, and Rin herself covered her mouth. After Young Bi's question, Ye Rin nodded her head silently and thought about what was happening. The guy said that of course the girl looks like a homeless person, but calling herself a monster is too much, and also began to come up with some crazy versions. The girl was shocked. She was in a little shock and silently looked into Young Bi's eyes. After a long pause, the girl asked about the homeless woman and sadly lowered her head down. Young Bi thought that he would rather get a couple of kicks from the old man than make Rin cry. The girl began to explain, saying that he called her that because she had a thin body, dull eyes, pale skin, and it felt like the girl was constantly sitting in a locked room like she was sick. Young Bi realized that she said the wrong thing again because Ryu Young constantly spoke out against Sabu's unfair actions, and now his tongue has become uncontrollable. Rin thought about Young Bi's words. Thinking about the girl's words, Rin looked at Young Bi and smiled. Young Bi noticed this. Young Bai decided to change the topic of conversation while Rin was in a good mood and asked why she felt like a monster. Ye Rin became sad and said that she sees. She added that she doesn't even see, but feels how sticky, muddy, dark thoughts of people are crawling towards her, and he is afraid that he will become the same. Ryu Young thought that if someone else had said this, he would not have believed it, but for some reason he believes this girl. Young Bi asked Rin to look at her and asked if she had something inside her. Rin looked into Young Bi's eyes very intently and peered into them carefully. Rin said that she doesn't know yet, and doesn't see anything inside Young Bai yet. She said that it's a pity that this is not visible in her. Young Bi said that since Rin has such a gift, then surely bad people cannot deceive her. And in her head she thought that if she had such a gift, she would have run away from Sabu on the very first day. Rin corrected Young Bai and said that everything is not as easy as it seems to her. All people are monsters. And Young Bi objected by saying that it shouldn't be like that, because she is a person, not a monster. Young Bi said that apparently Rin had too many bad people around her. Young Bi took Rin's hands and said that when Rin looks at cute babies or her parents, then she probably feels good. Rin added that it was true, but having sticky, nasty creatures crawling all over her was bad. Young Bi said that we need to clean up, replace the sticky, nasty creatures with good people. Meanwhile, in some open area, a man in a hat and cloak is galloping on a horse. Behind him jumps another group of people who are dressed in the same clothes. One of the people seemed to have an iron arm, a prosthetic arm, and he was holding the reins of a horse. The man had a rather evil look. He was clearly up to something not very good. It was some kind of workshop. There was a glass with small accessories on the table, and tools lay on the work table. The man assembled a mechanical iron hand and said that this prosthesis was perfectly preserved. Among the soldiers, and not only, this steel prosthesis is called the signature weapon of the Western Sky. There are people who call it the riot of the Western Wind. But in fact, the prosthesis was given the name Bulmanjitsu, which means a hand that reminds of something that should not be forgotten. Having activated the hand, the mechanic said that the prosthesis could hardly find another owner, and it was an honor for him to work with the owner of the prosthesis. This prosthesis cannot be used by one-armed people who have a right hand, and it also cannot be used if the arm is longer or shorter than the prosthesis itself. And the owner of the prosthesis had everything the same. Physique, arm length. The Bulmanjitsu was simply created just for him. The man asked to stop flattering him, and added that the rest of his arm was a little longer. The man showed the small size and said that his arm had to be adjusted to fit the prosthesis approximately this size. One of the men who was there opened his mouth in surprise and asked if he had cut off part of his hand. The man said that people try not to look too much at what they consider ugly, and now his right arm is a little shorter than his left. But no one even suspects it. The man, who was surprised by the story about cutting off his hand, asked if he could examine the man's hand. He agreed. Seeing the master roll out in a wheelchair, the man said that before making prosthetics for others, it would be better to make his own legs. He received the answer that in that case, the poison from the legs would spread throughout the body. The man with the prosthesis said that he had heard rumors that everyone except the master in this place was mute. to which he said that it was so. The man saw the bone of a man with a prosthesis and was scared. He said that the bone was exposed, and the second man was probably in incredible pain. The man looked serious and said that it hurt, but it was worth it. Il remembered that day when there was a strong thunderstorm, the very house he visited in the first place. The owner of the house was scared, so he took the sword and shouted and asked who came. Cheon entered. The man said that he scared him because he entered abruptly and did not knock. Il stood silently in place. The man said that, after all, one of the main palaces of their clan is located in this city and no one can attack here. This is ridiculous. The man in the green kimono said that he would not listen to Il because he had too much and went to bed. And the man himself made great efforts to defuse the situation. Il said that he had important information about the western sky. The man was stunned by this news. He did not understand where Il got such information from. The man imagined 5 silhouettes in his head: the northern sky, the western sky, the eastern sky, the young sky, and the heavenly spirit thirsty for blood. The frightened man asked if Il meant one of the above-mentioned representatives. Il said that he was talking about him, about the western sky, who is now being sought, who is said to be one-armed with 2 arms. Cheon's interlocutor became wary and reached for the sword. He said that he had never talked about the western sky, and that he was one-armed. Then he received the answer that the head had traveled to those parts, and Yukhak and Takjan knew everything. The man was scared. He said that he received the order about the western sky literally hours ago, and no one except the head and him knew about it, and Il somehow found out about it. Pulling the prosthesis out from under his sleeve, Il smiled and said that he seemed to have already guessed everything. The man got scared, pointed the sword at Il and asked where he got his right hand. Il quickly ran towards his opponent, shouting that he was an idiot and had had this prosthesis for a long time. The frightened men took a fighting stance with Il who ran towards him. Il hit his opponent's owl with his prosthetic and left a huge bloody scar. The man himself began to cough up blood. The man dropped the sword and said that the spare sky is more than 100 years old. Il said that he is the 2nd generation. The man asked Il why he hated him so much and continued to cough up blood. The man said that he doesn't hate, but simply despises firstborns. People like his opponent get everything on a silver platter. That's why they were born first. Having said that he was living too long, spikes appeared around Il prosthesis, which finished off the man. Il proudly told this story, and regretted that he could not get the 14th heart. A whole year has already passed since he received the 2nd hand, which was called the Madness of the West Wind. But on the day when Il molested his brother's daughter, he realized that he was weak and could not capture the heart of his great brother. It was a battle in which Il tried to kill his brother, who in turn defended his daughter. Appearing before Il with a sword, John Hyunru called his brother an ill-mannered bastard and fought off his brother's blow. He in turn just laughed, jumped back out the window and said, "See you next time." The man continued to say that if he had not paid attention to his sweet niece, he would have had unnecessary troubles. While measuring Il hand, the master said that they would heal the cut-off part of the hand and then slightly alter the prosthesis to make it easier to control. Il laughed and said that the master made him happy and smiled while looking at him. An elderly woman came into the room holding some kind of chest with different materials in her hands. Il asked what it was. The master replied that this is a material similar to facial skin, and it is used to create masks. They have just taken a cast, and now this old woman will go to create Il Wu's mask. The man said that the master was making him more and more happy and asked more about the mask. The master said that they would try to make the mask as comfortable as possible, and that he would never have to take it off. Cheon really looks like... Meanwhile, still in the same clearing under a tree, Young Bi and Yi Rin were sitting and talking. Rin said that she wanted to tidy everything up, but she didn't know how to do it. Young Bi replied that there are many ways to do it. Our heroine began to say that if Rin is strong, then she can kick the offenders. If she is rich, she can hire people to do the cleaning for her. If Ye Rin is talkative, she can mentally attack her opponents. And Young Bi also asked what Rin herself can do well. The girl thought about what she could do. Young Bi added that Rin probably has something that she can handle well. She needs to find this skill and develop it. Then it will become her strength. The girl, with a sad, empty look, hesitatingly said that she couldn't possibly be able to do anything. She said that she couldn't do anything. However, our Young Bai stopped Rin and told her to think about it carefully, and that Young Bai herself had to go to work, and Rin should go to her parents. Young Bai also knew that Mr. Namgung was sitting in the bushes, and she said that someone had been waiting for Rin for a long time. Namgung slowly began to approach them. Rin was surprised by the man. Young Bi asked if the girl knew this man. The frightened girl clung to Young Bi's clothes and hinted at something, saying that she didn't really know the person. Young Bi looked into Rin's eyes and said that when communicating with people, a girl should try to more accurately express what she wants, and then they will answer her in kind. The frightened girl, shy, loudly and bravely asked Young B to go with her. Young B was surprised. Mr. Namgung approached the girls and asked Young B to come with them because their lady's father would like to talk to Young B. Young B said that unfortunately it wouldn't work out because she had to go to work. She smiled and started to get up. Young B began to say goodbye to Rin, and Mr. Namgung said that they would tell Chen Hyangru that the girl went with them because the lady's father really wants to see her. Young Bai looked seriously and said that she didn't understand why she had to go to him right now. She made an agreement with the drink shop, not with him, and by law, she had to come. The girl also added that she hopes that their master respects contracts and promises. Mr. Namgung had nothing to answer. Rin began to beg Young B to enter into an agreement with her. The girl looked at the little mistress in surprise. Young B and Mr. Namgung opened their mouths in surprise. They did not understand what Yerin was up to. Without detaching from Young's clothes, the Bai girl asked if she could then see our heroine again. Something shot into Young B's heart. She couldn't just watch how they begged her. It was hard for her. A tearful Rin wanted to know the answer to her question, whether she could still see Young Bai or not. Mr. Namgung began to explain that such things are not called an agreement, but a promise. Stopping him, Young B said that it was not important, and also asked that if she made a contract, what could they give her in return? One could read confusion on Rin's face. The girl didn't know what to answer. She didn't even understand any more than she didn't know. Everyone looked at Rin. The girl continued to not understand anything. She was surprised and shocked. Then the girl began to ask whether it is necessary to give something in return when concluding a contract. Young B and Mr. Namgung smiled and turned away and giggled quietly. The answer was funny. Rin began to worry that she had done something wrong, and Young B replied that she would definitely give something, and also suggested an interesting idea. Young B suggested that from now on, if Rin hangs a red ribbon on the window, then within 2 days Young B will definitely come. The girl said that due to personal circumstances, she cannot come whenever she wants. In return, Young Bai will ask Rin to grant her 3 wishes, which she will come up with later. Mr. Namgung sat and discussed the fact that it seems that Young Bai does not know who their mistress is, and the promise resembles childish pranks. The man thought about stopping them. Before she could say anything, Rin willingly agreed to these conditions, and then asked if they had concluded an agreement. Young B looked into Rin's eyes, smiled, and said that from now on they made an agreement. Mr. Namgung, who was behind, didn't really understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Mr. Namgung reported everything to Rin's father. The man said that he imagined that Young B was not simple, but in addition to talent, she also had courage. Chan Hyangru smiled and listened to the report. Namgung Jin said that there are still things that cause strangeness. The security reported that Young Bai has very high skills in martial arts. Chan Hyangru thought about everything that Namgung Jin said. Judging by Young B's dance, he already understood that she knows martial arts. He said that she looks like a little perky girl, but she is stronger than they think. The head of the clan wondered whether this was good for him or not, and Namgung Jin did not understand what the man was talking about. Then Chan Hyangru continued that if she were a boy, he would have to find out about her sabu and choose one of the two. This choice was between luring him or killing him. The man's gaze was very serious and stern. Namgung Jin thought that the man's words meant that in any case he did not plan to leave the boy next to the mistress, but at the same time he would not mind taking Young Bai under his command. Namgung Jin added that 3 months ago a female security guard almost put the lady in danger and suggested that they find out more about Young B. Chan Hyangru laughed and said that his daughter already owes her life to Young B, and therefore since she is not a boy, it would not be nice of him. Men thought about something. Young B is the successor of the clan, or a powerful female master, because this village is ruled by the successors of the Ami clan. The head of the clan asked Jin that when Ye Rin met with Young B, he would place fast guards and they would monitor the girls. Sighing heavily, the man said that judging by Young B's skill, it is unlikely that any of his subordinates will be able to defeat her, but unfortunately, neither the head himself nor Namgung Jin can sit next to him. They have a lot to do. The head of the clan changed the subject, hit the table and said that he was very sorry for Namgung Jin's family. Lowering his heavy gaze to the floor, he said that he still remembered everything as if in reality. Together, the men imagined how the corpse of Namgung Jin's older brother lay next to the table. And after a few seconds, everything disappeared, because this is just a performance. Chan Hyangru was very angry. He said that he himself would have broken all his brother's bones. And the most offensive thing is that he cannot even declare who did it. The head said that Namgung Jin should now accompany his brother, but again he could not let him go home, and then began to apologize to Jin. Namgung Jin bowed and said that the most important thing for him is that he knows who the criminal is, and moreover, it was only his decision. An angry Namgung Jin said that he would stay close to the head and wait for Il Cheon to arrive, because for sure Chan Hyangru is his last goal, and Jin's place now is not next to his brother's corpse, but with the head. Jin remembered that terrible moment when he held his brother's corpse in his arms and said that he would skin the one who killed him, burn his bones to ashes, and drink his blood for his brother. Holding his brother's hand, he said that he would not return home until he finished him off completely, and asked only to wait. Meanwhile, the home of the Namgung family, a huge area with many buildings. Inside, people in white coats were reading a prayer, and smoke was wafting around. In the middle, there was a coffin covered with some kind of cloth. People took turns approaching the coffin and hugging it, a farewell ceremony for the deceased elder brother. There was a boy sitting on the street who was playing with a stick and was quite sad. Someone came up from behind, stroked his head, and addressed the boy as San Yi. They asked him if he was crying because of his uncle, to which he addressed his brother. The young man said that their uncle loved the young man and his sister, True San Yi, very much. Their father is now looking for their uncle's killer, and therefore they need to pull themselves together and continue to study in order to be useful. The boy said that he would go to study at Cheonmuhakwan, to which his brother said that it was just a school and he needed to go to the community of martial artists. My sister came and said that she could help my father more than this crybaby. The brother hugged the two children and said that they were both great and that together they could help their father. Then the guy said that it was time for them to see their uncle off and invited them to go with him. The children said that since Dad could not join them, they should at least try to see off their uncle with all honors. As a result, the brother and sister burst into tears in front of their older brother. They are still children. Our hero was walking along the streets of the village and resting when suddenly he noticed something on Rin's window, indicating that Bai Young should come to her. Bi Young came to Ye Rin and treated her to delicious food. The girl said that this is the most famous food in their village. It gives vitality to the body and spirit, and also smooths out wrinkles. Walking around the city in the rain with an umbrella, our hero again saw the red ribbon on Rin's window and hurried to her. Bai Young brought a homemade figurine of a catfish that dreamed of flying in the sky. She told Rin to put the figurine in an empty cage, because otherwise it looks gloomy. The next day, our tired hero was heading somewhere, complaining of back pain. Having walked a little further, he noticed something and stopped. He closely watched this picture. Ryu Young looked and smiled. He liked what he looked at, but what did he see there? He looked at Ye Rin's window, which had many red ribbons tied on it. It was night outside. There was a huge area, and there was a house outside of it. The sky was clear. Ye Rin was fast asleep. The street was quiet. No one could disturb her. The girl suddenly woke up with tears in her eyes, apparently having dreamed something. The girl stood up and, sitting on the bed, began to breathe heavily as if she were being strangled. The girl looked at the cage, but everything was cloudy. She did not understand what was there. There was a gift in the cage for young Boo, which she asked to put in the cage. The girl closely watched the cage and what was happening in it. She did not take her eyes off for a second. The girl remembered how they put the figurine in the cage, and she asked if it was possible to keep a river fish in a cage. And young Bee answered her that despite the fact that the catfish is a fish, it has wings. Young Bai continued to say that he replaces his legs with mustaches, uses fins underwater, and wings for flight. He is silent and does not need to be fed. Such a bird cannot be found. The girl giggled, remembering young Bee's stories about this miracle bird. Rin decided to get out of bed and go to the cage. She lowered her legs and removed the covers. The girl went straight to the cage in which the same catfish with wings lay. As we got closer, everything became lighter. The cage stood in the other corner of the room. The miracle bird made of wood did not move or make any sounds. It sat in a cage with water, and sakura petals floated in the water. Meanwhile, Rin continued to cover the window with red ribbons, decorating it all the time. Chon Hyungru looked at the window and thought about it. Jin said that if the head doesn't like it, then he can tell young Bai to change the method of communication, or the girl should simply visit the mistress periodically. Chon Hyunru cried with joy. He turned away and said that he could not dislike anything here. The head of the clan ordered to follow him and said that they still had too much to do. To the head of Chon Hyungrun came up with the idea to tell Ye Rin to hang up blue ribbons. If she wanted to see her father, he could quickly rush over as soon as he saw her. The answer may seem rude, but Namgung Jin said that if there are no blue ribbons there and he feels awkward, is the head ready for it? The head was a little offended by this, but he said that they were late and they needed to hurry. Meanwhile, young Bee looked at her reflection in the mirror and said that she powdered her face, painted her lips, did her hair. Everything is ready. Makeup is complete. Smiling young Bee was getting ready to go to work, rolling up some piece of fabric. Sabu came up behind him and turned to our hero. He asked if the student was really having fun or if he just imagined it. The student looked at the master with a rather rude look, a short pause. Young Bee screamed about how Sabu could allow himself to enter a girl's room without knocking, and how tactless he was in general. Sabu yelled at the student saying that Ryu Young is not a girl, but a boy, to which the guy stated that the teacher himself told him to become a real girl, and now he is changing his word. The angry old man did not know what he would answer. He wanted to shout, but there was no reason. The old man thought about it, and said that he still taught Ryu well Yona. His cunning calls for punishment, but his ability to make arguments makes him more and more like a girl. The old man got to the bottom of the student, saying that he was constantly whining that he didn't like it in the glass shop, but now he seemed to like it, whether the student was hiding something from him. The boy became wary and thought that the old man was too shrewd. The boy went on the defensive, saying that the old man really wanted him to constantly cry because of the evil Sabu, who sold him to a liquor store for money. The student began to pretend to be a sissy, and say that if fate had destined him this way, then he decided to at least find joy in this time, because the body hardly gets tired. Ryu Yong continued his performance about how fragile and gentle he was, and the old man began to get angry with him, saying that the student was infuriating him, and he was running out of patience, and therefore let him go to work. Once again, the poor fragile creature goes to work barefoot with a heavy musical instrument on her back to earn money for a drunken old man. Suddenly, after these words, a stone flies into the back of Young B's head, and the girl screams in pain. Sabu shouted for the student to walk silently, because he was in the forest, and predators could attack him, and Young B herself thought that she was 100 meters away from the house, and even so they got him. Meanwhile, on a bright sunny day, Mount Hyun, someone was screaming about some kind of ghost. Some group of warriors looked at the destroyed village and said that this was impossible. The village was the refuge of Namjokbu. It is strange that they were killed so easily. The head of the detachment suggested looking for evidence related to the destruction of the village. One of the soldiers held coals in his hands and said that it was unclear how they could burn such a large area so quickly. Another warrior said that even if everything here was doused with oil, it is impossible for everything to burn out so quickly. Well, certainly not gunpowder, otherwise it would not have been found. They thought it was Sogol acid. After these words, one of the young men got scared, and with surprised eyes asked that Sogol acid is that legendary powder, 1 cup, which can kill 5 or 6 abmals. The wars began to think that the powder was too expensive. It was hard to find on the black market even for 10 gold coins, and it would cost a fortune for an open space. One of the warriors added that if you mix the powder with flour, the range of action will increase. Showing his fingers, the guy said that given the radius of the fire, about 48 liters of Sogol acid were needed here. The squad did not understand who could spend so much to wipe out the Namjokbu clan from the face of the earth. One of the warriors came to the conclusion that there are only 3 communities that, given their wealth and strength, could do this. The first is Makyangak. The second is the community of Black Celestial Warriors. Another guy added that if you remember these communities, they have no motive, and they even expressed their respect to Namjokbu. The warriors thought that it could be a heavenly spirit, but immediately closed the topic by saying that they were just investigating. A subordinate came running to the squad leader and said that he had a report. The guy said that several human bones were found. Everything was well disguised, of course, but it seemed to him that the murders were committed by one person. Everyone was in shock. The young man added that one blade was simple, and the second was very thin, like paper. Perhaps it was a master who wielded the sword of smashing thunder. Meanwhile, a ship was sailing in some sea, clear, sunny weather. There was no noticeable movement on the ship. From a distance, it seemed as if there was no crew there. There was a lone guy standing on the ship in a hat and dark cape. He was a noble young man, with long hair and a hat that covered his face. Some kind of huge room with a bunch of drawers and a bunch of different shelves on which something lay. Chon Hyangru sat and thought that the hideout of that cunning Namjokbu was destroyed by one person. A voice from behind the wall said that this was unlikely. He thought that there was one killer and a dozen more of his henchmen. The report indicated that the village was large. The head shouted that his eyes did not see the report, and asked the person to come into the room because it was inconvenient to talk to the wall. A voice from behind the wall said that the head of the Martial Masters community forgot who they are. They are members of the White Shadow Group. They don't even have a shadow, so they are also called the Shadowless Squad. And he is, after all, their leader. Angry Zhang Hyangru said that he would give the letter to Jin so that he would send it to the headquarters of the Chenshin League. It seems they are funding the Shadowless Squad too much. Realizing that things were bad, the commander of the Shadowless Squad said. The head was waiting for him to come in now. Having entered, the man asked to enter into his position at least once. He, after all, is the leader of the Shadowless detachment, and the leader constantly needs to see his face. The head shouted for him to come and sit down. Chon Hyunru ordered to give him the report he was talking about, because he wants to see everything himself. The man hesitated. The head of the Shadowless Squad pointed to his forehead and said that the entire report was in his head. Chon Hyangru shouted even louder and told Jin to immediately send a letter to headquarters, ordering him to find the man an amount equal to a year's salary. The man calmed the head down and said that there was a code anyway, and he couldn't read it. And so he began to tell the story himself. The people of the Heavenly Spirit came to Namjokmu's hideout. One killed everyone. The rest covered their tracks. Namajokmu as John Hak was the only one who didn't like Jung Hyangru, and the other two communities treated him well. Chon Hyangru thought that perhaps their guys killed him as a sign of justice, to which the man opposite said that he did not kill him, and his guys had recently been busy searching for the western sky. They came to the general conclusion that none of their guys killed him, and when the crimes were serious, people of the heavenly spirit were always involved. The head of the Shadowless Squad recalled that 6 months ago there was a massacre there. Then it was the work of the heir to the community of Black Celestial Warriors, and the man thinks that he is somehow involved in it. Chon Hyangru asked if the man was talking about the massacre committed by the grandson of the Mushinma family, Kal Hyobon. The man also added that the granddaughter, whom John Hak doted on, was engaged to that Kal Hyobon. At that time, everyone perceived him as a prince. They believed that he would become the main hero in the Black World of Warriors. But this prince changed during training and brutally killed everyone with whom he trained. During the dialogue, it can be understood that the cunning John Hak could not miss this, and began his own investigation. And therefore he was possibly eliminated. Someone threw in a theory that it could be Machungak people, but the man immediately refuted this and said that this simply could not happen. Chon Hyangru asked why then the man thinks that these were people of the heavenly spirit, and where is the whole motive in this? The head of the Shadowless Squad said that he felt it, and the motive was unimportant, because his premonition never failed. After these words, Chon Hyangru became very angry. His pupils disappeared from anger, and he looked at the head of the Shadowless detachment. Namgung Jin watched as Jung Hyangru kicks the second man, and he in turn tries to justify himself that there is still a motive. Chon Hyangru grabbed the head of the Shadowless Squad by the clothes, and he continued to say that only they and the heavenly spirit benefit from this, and since they have nothing to do with it, then only the heavenly spirit remains. After these words, the head thought about it, and said that the subordinate was right, and continued to reason that all this was most likely a heavenly spirit. Adjusting his clothes, the head of the Shadowless Squad said that before the incident, the son of the head of the Black Celestial Warrior community was considered the official heir of the Machungak. Now the heir to Machungak is the son of the current head of Machungak. He is not the firstborn, but everyone respects and recognizes him as the eldest son. His name is B. His training comrades simply called him the second son. Compared to the famous Kal Hyobong or his brother Kal Hyo-ryong, there wasn't much information about this because he didn't stand out. That was all the information. The man continued to talk, saying that 6 months before the incident he did not go out in public, so now there are no survivors who saw his face. Deciding to summarize, the man said that in a word, after the proclamation of the heir, they began to have internal upheavals, and now he was ordered from Machungak to return home. Meanwhile, on a sunny day, there was a large house on a beautiful grounds in yellow tones. Someone looked at the damaged fence and couldn't figure out who did it. The man took the stone. He was told not to bother. It was done by one of the grumpy people. The man's wife called him to drink tea because it would soon get cold. The guy said that he would come right away. The man threw out a stone that got stuck in the fence and turned around and went somewhere. At the same moment, Young B and Rin were spending time together. Rin asked Young B to be careful. Young Bai showed an excellent technique of some kind of jerks and moved as if teleporting. Our Young Bai jumped through the window and stood on her tiptoe like a real lady. Smiling at Rin, the girl said that she welcomed her and extended her arms for a hug. Rin was completely shocked by Young Bai performing such a technique, so she covered her mouth with the tape and looked at her with wide eyes in surprise. Young B thought that she scared Rin, and therefore apologized and said that she tried to run as quickly as possible. And when she saw her, she immediately jumped up without thinking about what could scare her. Surprised, Rin said that she was not afraid. It's just that Young B's beautiful eyes look very much like diamonds. Young B remembered Sabu's words, that her eyes were a side effect of abusing her Naranshimbab skills, and therefore called her a liar. Young B sighed heavily and said that she hoped she could soon regain her previous color. Rin asked if Young was unpleasant. Bai heard this and continued to peer into Young B's eyes. Rin apologized, saying that perhaps Young B was unpleasant that she was staring at her and covered her mouth in embarrassment. Surprised, Young B said that everything was fine and she didn't think anything like that and she wasn't offended. Rin remembered how people stared at her after compliments and it was unpleasant, but she had just done the same thing, so she apologized and began to worry. Young B put her hand on Rin's shoulder and said that everything was fine, and also began to speak. The girl added that Rin would never become as sweaty, dirty, and ugly as those people, even if she ran along the mountain where Young B lives 1,000,000,000 times. Rin was surprised by such words. Young B continued to say that because Rin expressed a compliment to the girl, she did it very nicely. Rin said that Young B is beautiful. Young B thanked Rin several more times and said that in her opinion, the beautiful Rin had become more beautiful and asked her to show her face closer. B Young touched Rin's face and said that she was a very beautiful girl, and Rin felt the warmth of Young B's hands. Rin always felt disgusted by everyone except her parents, but Young B was fine. Young Bai pointed at Rin's exhausted eyes and said that she did not look completely healthy yet. She also pointed out the bluish skin, but thought about the fact that the girl had never left the room. Young Bi asked if it was boring for Rin to be in her room all the time. Young Bi herself wouldn't last 4 days in such a box. Rin stammered and said that she didn't know, and there were a lot of people on the street. Young Bi asked if the girl was scared to go out on the street because there were a lot of people there. Rin lowered her eyes to the floor and remained silent. Young Bi thought about what Rin had told her before, how men pestered her, and it seems that the girl still finds it hard to look at them. Then Young Bi suggested going to a place where there was no one. Rin was surprised and asked if there was such a place. Young Bai replied that of course there is. 15 minutes, and they are already in a deserted place, and offered to show this place. Young Bai suggested going to where she lives. Young Bi said that it was on Mount Ami and waited impatiently for Ye Rin's answer. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Dabo recap with love.